Let's go ahead and get started. It's not quite 1 o'clock, but we've got a number of items here. Let me just remind everybody that we've got a room downstairs that we're videoing or teleconferencing with, and the presenters, some of the presenters are down there and so forth, and they will be coming in and out to accommodate the agenda here and make sure everybody's here on time. One other item, let me mention, I think some of you are aware of, perhaps most are, that our executive director just got engaged. This is, what, about a month ago?
Who's counting? A month and a half, maybe.
And she's got a wedding planned for October.
The week after our board meeting.
Yeah. So
I plan.
she's got some work to do in planning weddings for me now. And then, so certainly want to congratulate Sarah on that accomplishment, and look forward to hearing all about this wedding and so forth. It's a great one to make sure everybody's aware of that.
And we will
Thank you.
Mark.
He's in Chattanooga. He's just the meeting. I'll let him know he's been requested. But thank you. We're excited.
Okay, legislative update.
You ready? All right.
Ready.
Well, I think we had a great year legislatively this year. We passed 100% of our legislative priorities for the 2016 session. As you saw in our budget discussion earlier, our request was $1.026 million, and we came out with about $1.5 million. And we were the only agency in state government that did not have to appear in front of the House Education Committee, and I wish to thank the commissioner and her team for that, because they were held in so long that the chairman pulled me aside and he said, "Oh, well, you guys talk to us a lot. We trust you. Don't worry about it." I've never heard those words from a finance chairman of mine.
Well, you're welcome, Nathan.
Yeah. So anyway, so it was a fabulous session. We had Ari, who was our policy fellow, who was with me, and it made it possible to actually cover all of the committees. As you know, the House of Representatives has 2 education committees and 2 subcommittees, and so they all meet pretty much simultaneously, while at the same time the Senate committees are going on, and then the random appearances in front of the government operations committees. So let's see. Academic and standards-based responsibilities. We'll go through a few of these. Senate Bill 2499 by Senator Gresham made it clear that what the state sets are standards and what the locals set are curriculum. We have said that for a long time, but the Tennessee Code Annotated on a few occasions did not agree with us. And so Senator Gresham introduced this bill to make certain that we were all telling the truth when we said that. The State Board of Education was also given more requirements of the social studies standards to make sure that they're appropriate grade level for high school and that they dealt with the 3 branches of government. As I was explaining to the Social Studies Standards Recommendation Committee, there are more individual directives on social studies than almost anywhere else, and that's because senators and representatives are obviously fairly big social studies fans, and they tend to pass bills to tell us to make sure that we're looking after those things, and that came in this bill as well. Also authorizing the state board to approve academic standards for an elective state-funded course consisting of a non-sectarian, non-religious academic study of the Bible. Now that was already in the law, but the language used in that law was curriculum instead of standards, so that needed to be changed. So PC 667 was a result of work with Representative Love, and we are required to approve appropriate computer science courses that every candidate for a full high school diploma may enroll in and complete to satisfy an elective focus requirement for graduation. That bill was kind of in a rough place to begin with, and Representative Love reached out to us as well as the department, and we worked with him to find a satisfactory place to put that. So PC 660, again another social studies bill, requires the State Board of Education to ensure that the revised standards on social studies do not promote religion and do not amount to indoctrination or proselytism. And so obviously some of that is in the eye of the beholder, but I can tell you, your Standards Recommendation Committee, or that is to say the legislatures and the Governor's Standards Recommendation Committee, as well as the educator teams, are extremely cognizant of this requirement put into law this year. Just, you know, this was in response to, obviously, the news articles about the 7th grade social studies teaching and the controversies that have come up about Islam. Under administrative responsibilities, this was a very big deal for us. This was the main crux of our legislative package this year. The Senate Bill 1731 by Senator Gresham and 1807 by Chairman Brooks. And this allows us to charge up to a 4% authorizer fee. And we say up to because that's the key there. Unlike any of the authorizer fees that have been proposed in the General Assembly before, and Wendy can certainly talk about this, this will give us the resources necessary to carry out the law. It also sets a standard of transparency, whereby we will account for the use of all of these funds, and we will return the excess to the classroom, so that there will be, you know, the concern is always, is money being taken out for things that are not directly related to the charter authorization process. So we certainly worked with other folks, and we came up with this, and I'm very thankful to all those who had input on it. We will have to set the amount by April 1st of the previous year. It can be up to 4%. We will have to report transparently how those dollars are used, and the excess will be returned to the classroom. And I will tell you, the provisions of this law will inform conversations moving forward on any other charter authorizer bill, charter authorizer fee bill. So the report would be due by the 1st of December. So I know this is tough to see, but I really want to talk about Public Chapter 1020. This represents the largest investment in K-12 education in the history of the state that did not coincide with a tax increase, okay? For the State Board of Education, why is it particularly significant other than the obvious reasons? It's particularly significant because your BEP Review Committee took a very measured and targeted approach this last year with the BEP report. In the past, I can tell you, having worked with the Senate, we would get the BEP report in November, and it would ask invariably for $500 million that didn't exist. And the pressure from that group was always to try to find money that wasn't there. On this occasion, the BEP committee asked for the 12th year, the 12th month of insurance to be covered, which was done. It asked for money to be put into teacher salaries. This administration has a public commitment, which they have more than kept up with, to increase the dollars going into teacher salaries. We asked for $15 million for recurring technology funds. We asked for $50 million to address inflationary costs. And the other big piece that we asked for, which they dealt with in this, was we wanted to stop the disincentive that existed in policy and law for folks who could graduate early. We have a number of laws, Move On When Ready and some others, that say when a student is ready to graduate, they should be allowed to go. It's been a point of friction with some local districts because when they go, the BEP dollars would go with them. That was fixed this year, so that is extremely important all the way around. Public Chapter 680, this is the A through F grading scale. It's to be developed by the Department of Education and must be based on student performance on end-of-year courses, student growth, and other outcome indicators. And we're assigned to take a look at that. PC 684, this requires the State Board of Education and all agencies in the education apparatus in the state of Tennessee to cooperate with OREA. OREA is the Comptroller's Office of Research and Education Accountability. Okay, it is indirectly part of the legislative branch, in that the Comptroller is elected by both houses of the legislature, sitting as one body. And it's something akin to a GAO for education. And this law makes it clear that local districts, state board, the department, everyone needs to cooperate with their requests. Public chapter.
We need a law.
You could ask that question a couple times.
That was rhetorical, I guess, but dang.
Yeah, it's, I think it was mostly aimed at certain local districts who were not familiar with OREA. And the Comptroller's authority is extremely broad. There's no doubt about that. But I wanted to make the point that when questions come from them, they're expected to be answered. And
Hop to it.
that's a good way to phrase it. So
That's that slang thing.
that's right. It's going into your press release. So, Public Chapter 529, this is a bill by Senator Boeing. There's always different school bus bills, and this would be Type A school buses to be used for 15 years. Public Chapter 889 is a course access program authorizing eligible participating students to enroll in up to 2 course access program courses a year. Since this is so small, that's why I'm reading through it. As determined by the authorizing LEA, the department will deduct state BEP funds otherwise due to the LEA and send such funds to the folks who are operating the course. It has some requirements for the department. Your specific requirements are this. You promulgate rules by which the LEA authorizes course providers pursuant to this section, including all deadlines and guidelines. It will include on the website a link to the rules, which will be posted on the Secretary of State's website. So we'll point to them once they're all through and completed. Adopt rules and regulations necessary to implement, and adopt rules relative to the payments required through the course access program. Authorizes us to set a cap on the amount of funds that can be charged for a particular course, and promulgate the rules to effectuate this purpose. Now, that doesn't mean that we do it in a vacuum. Obviously, that's something we do in conjunction with the department. They'll bring it to us, but the authority to promulgate rules is in your hands. Senator Tate and Representative Akbari. This bill, Senate Bill 1864, this year was kind of an interesting and collaborative process. Senator Tate wanted to set up rules for a 501c3 that could go into some of the large cities and offer tutoring and focus programs, but he wanted it to be necessarily very large if they fit in this category, and he essentially wanted to give us the authority to create the rules in the event that the nonprofit emerged. So I think he's working with some folks down there to have that happen. There is no expectation on his part or Representative Akbari's part that we would necessarily get about this business prior to having some structure to move on. This was something he wanted to put in place in advance. Dr. Hayburn and myself met with him on a couple of occasions, and we kind of walked through the process, both on the House and Senate side.
I'm not sure I understand what that does.
Well, and that's you wouldn't be the only one. He essentially wants the authority to regulate large operations which will bring volunteers into specifically Shelby County schools, but he put population size parameters on the bill so that it would also affect Nashville in the event that the nonprofit itself emerged. I think it came about as conversations he had with some of his constituents, where people would say, you know, what we need is a trained corps of volunteers to come in here to the school district. And he said, well, there ought to be some guideposts to make sure that this thing is done properly. So in concern that that was going to happen and wanting to make sure there would be some apparatus to regulate it, he pursued this legislation.
Okay.
And so the rules would be promulgated by us, and it would give the commissioner some specific authorities in there as well. So yes, you're not the only one, and I would say when the time comes, he knows that we're going to have to spend a great deal of time kind of working through what it is they're after. But he has his legislative authority when that time comes. Commissioner, have you heard anything different from Senator Tate?
Exactly.
So, I also do have a handy-dandy list of all the education legislation that passed this year, but these bills are essentially those that set out more tasks or for this board or specifically affect us the most. So questions, thoughts, concerns? Yes, ma'am.
Public Chapter 680, the A through F.
Yes.
Are there conversations about, I know we're supposed to review it, but is the state, vision that the state board staff would be part of the conversation in developing as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. Laura Unkelod is certainly helping lead with Nate Schwartz, our standards and assessment work group for ESSA. And then we have a separate group working on the A through F grading system, but there's going to be some matching under ESSA of what's our ESSA plan, and then actually how does the A through F grading system layer on top of that. And in our timeline, we have developed when we would come and bring that to the state board for your review.
Great, thank you. Laura needed something else to do.
It has to.
I don't think there is any part of that that's necessarily going on that's sequestered or separate from us. The conversation is definitely ongoing and very fluid.
Absolutely.
Thoughts, questions, concerns? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Now, was that, the question, is that the uniform grading thing? Okay,
Well,
that is.
This is
A
school
through F
grade.
grading. Uniform grading is a policy.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Each school graded A through F in the state. So uniform in that sense.
But it wasn't, there some other legislation on uniform grading that we have not talked about, or am I imagining something?
We have a policy conversation about
Yeah,
that.
Could have been the policy.
The change that is being made, that's being proposed in the policy tomorrow is in response to some legislation that was passed. So we're just updating that policy tomorrow with the most recent legislation that pertains to how LEAs are able to award quality points for GPAs.
Yes.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm,
That's, yes.
yeah. And that's, I guess we'll talk about that item tomorrow. I'm still having a little bit of trouble exactly understanding exactly what we're talking about there. Maybe it's just me,
And there's questions
but I
about the
couldn't get a good
implementation timeline.
vision. Okay, other questions? Okay, assessment update. Candace, you gonna?
Dr. Towns is going to present, so I'll let Dr. Towns come up. I'll give just some opening comments for this part of the conversation.
Do we have our presentation?
I think Nathan's. So while he is pulling that up, I did want to mention we made some significant announcements over the last couple of weeks about our assessment transition, selection of a new vendor and the process that led to that, and changes to the assessment going into next year, which include time reductions and schedule logistics changes. So Nikki is going to walk through that, and then we also have an opportunity to talk about some of our SO work as well.
Sure. So just to provide a brief update on 26-17, 16-17 assessment. So we had been, of course, throughout over the school year last year, collecting feedback from all venues around the transition to TN Ready. And there were some things that we heard loud and clear repeatedly around things that we could improve and where we need to go in the future. So some of those included challenges around logistics and scheduling and wanting to make sure that we weren't being disruptive to the regular class day. Wanting to be sure that we're focusing on protecting instructional time and thinking about the instructional shifts that need to occur with the transition to more rigorous standards, as well as instructional pacing, so that teachers could be sure that they could cover the full breadth and depth of the standards that we have. And then finally, we had a conversation, pretty robust, starting with the assessment task force last summer around this notion of formative versus summative assessment and where we needed to be as a State Department of Education. So coming out of that feedback, we've prioritized a few things for the 2016-17 school year with regard to assessment. First, we're going to maintain the rigor and quality of the assessment. We know that we have stepped up our expectations for educators and for students, and we fully expect that they will rise to meet those more rigorous expectations. So we are still on the same pathway with regard to maintaining the rigor and quality. We want to minimize that disruption. So the changes that you're going to see are all about making sure that schools have the opportunity to plan assessment in a way that flows with the natural school day as opposed to kind of shutting down school for testing. We are going to focus on summative assessment goals. You'll see that some question types that we may have been looking at, we've decided that those might have been more appropriate for formative assessment that informs instruction as opposed to summative assessment where we're really looking at did students master the content standards. So we'll talk a little bit about that shift. We are trying to make sure that we streamline and smooth the entire assessment process. Some of the improvements we've been able to make with the new vendor that I'll talk about are all about making sure that this is pretty seamless and that districts and schools understand the expectations and can easily administer the assessments. And then finally, we're positioning for those new standards that were approved this spring. In 2017-18, we'll actually be implementing those new standards, which means we'll have a new assessment aligned to those standards in 2017-18. So we're positioning for that. So what are the next steps? When I was here last, I think we had a brief conversation about the Pearson emergency contract that we awarded to make sure for the assessments that we were able to complete all of our high school assessments this past school year. Those are being scored. In fact, we're pretty much done with the high school EOC scoring, and we'll be moving into the standard setting process where we set the cut scores that we've discussed over this summer. August 22nd will be the week of standard setting, and I think we've reached out to invite some of you to maybe drop in and observe that process of setting those cut scores for high school EOC. In addition, we had to turn our attention fairly quickly to trying to identify who would be our long-term vendor for 16-17 and beyond. So we have made that announcement. We executed the contract with Questar on July 14th. So we've kicked off the work in earnest with them to develop our test that will begin with fall EOC in the November timeframe. Finally, we are going to finish up the scoring and do the full reporting for high school EOC, and that will come out later this fall in the October timeframe. So we've moved to get our 16-17 assessment program fully underway. Having identified the new vendor, as the commissioner mentioned, we have announced a reduction of testing time by 30%. So I think you all know that when we were talking about this time last year, we were considering the fact that we've never done this assessment with these new item types that required more critical thinking, where we were moving beyond multiple choice tests. And in that event, we wanted to be sure that we gave students more than enough time to complete and show us in earnest what they knew and what they were able to do. Having gone through this first year experience, we are now at a place where we feel like we can refine the timing and actually streamline the testing, which has allowed us to be able to make this top line reduction of 30% in terms of test time. In addition, we've eliminated part one, that structure where we had a test window that was in February for year-long classes and also at the end of the year, where now we feel like we're able to collapse both components, those more constructed response components of the assessment, to the end of the year and still be able to get them scored. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about Questar. So we've eliminated that additional window, which we feel like speaks to the feedback that we heard from districts that it felt burdensome to have two different administration windows. We've also broken down the test into smaller parts. Educators refer to this as chunking. So we've designed the test so that districts can determine when they administer these subparts. The subparts are typically from 30 to 50 minutes, which means that they can fit into a regular bell schedule at a school, and the only more extended subparts are those that include the writing component, those constructed response components, because of course we still want to give students the full opportunity to read those texts and be able to write their essay responses without being rushed. So those are 75 and 85 minute subparts, but the rest of them are within a regular period window. And so finally this year for social studies, it will be a field test for grades 3 through 8. We are going to operationally administer U.S. history, but because we were not able to fully deliver the 3/8 social studies test last year, we did not have those field test items for development, and so we are going to need to complete a field test with all students in grades 3 through 8 this year to prepare us for the new social studies assessment based on those new standards that we're going to adopt. So a little bit about Questar. So this is the vendor that we came to select after doing a full vetting process. We really stepped back after we made that late April announcement around terminating the prior vendor and looked at the landscape of what vendors have been doing this type of work. The good news is that over the last 2 years, there have been about 25 states who've attempted to do online assessment statewide. So we were able to have the benefit of seeing who was able to perform and who wasn't. And there's really not a large group of vendors who are able to do this work successfully. We looked at about 6 to 7 vendors. And having done that work, there was a firm, Questar, that kept coming up. As we talked to folks, they were like, this firm was very responsive, very much engaged to be in the field, partner and shoulder to shoulder with districts and with educators. The vendor was welcoming and inviting to educators writing items. And so Questar just seemed like the right fit. And indeed, they took the state of Mississippi to completely online assessment last year. So the state of Mississippi in grades 3 through 8 was able to administer online assessments to 40,000 students per grade level in a 1-year transition. And I only say half jokingly, we don't let Mississippi beat us. And I think that they had the right partner, and we didn't. And so we just felt like the profile of Questar was one that really fit the needs of what the context looks like in Tennessee, and all of those references that I was able to get from my counterparts in other states. The commissioner talked to other states. This was a firm that kept coming up as a really solid, reliable firm. Most folks have never heard of Questar because they don't make headlines in the paper. They do the work in the background and they get it done well. So they're not being talked about because they're just quietly able to deliver on the technology platform. So we had honestly just started working with Questar for the 2nd grade assessment that we were developing. They won the contract in April, and so we had started to build a relationship with them for 2nd grade, and then we started getting all of this positive feedback in terms of looking at them for being our full online assessment vendor. So we were able to move forward with Questar as the vendor for our entire TCAP program. So they'll be helping us develop items for ELA and math, and then they'll also be doing the administration for all 4 content areas, ELA, math, science, and social studies. So with that, we will be continuing our commitment to online assessment and thinking about how we phase in online assessment. So we've decided that we are going to do that phase in over the next 3 years, and that for this year coming up in 16-17, grades 3 through 8 will only be paper pencil. But we will be doing these technology proof points with the vendor to offer an online option for high schools this year. Again, this would be the district and school option. There will still be paper pencil available for high school, but we want to give ourselves the opportunity to be very methodical and deliberate in that transition to online assessment. Questar has been doing online assessment for over a decade. Their platform, Nextera, is on its 3rd generation of development. It's a very user-friendly interface. We believe that schools and districts will find this definitely an upgrade to the product that we were using on last year. So we look forward to introducing that platform, but we're just going to take our time to ramp up to the full statewide online assessment over the next 3 years. Questar has committed to us that the investments that districts have made in their technology, those investments will not go to waste. We have used the term vendor readiness. They are going to be ready for the technology environment that's out there in our districts and schools, and they are going to make sure that they partner well with them to be able to make this transition successful over the next 3 years. So now let me turn to a few of the actual design constructs and talk about math, ELA, and social studies. So for math, we are really thinking about the pacing and the connection between major work of the grade and additional supporting work. We heard a lot last year about the way that the Part 1 structure seemed to hamper teachers from being able to fully integrate those two components of the standards. And so with the elimination of Part 1, we feel like there's going to be benefits gained in terms of the pacing and the flexibility that teachers have in their curriculum. We're going to be able to offer more flexibility because of that chunking, and then we're going to be thinking about different item types that we're introducing to measure those higher order and critical thinking skills. So we will be moving with the elimination of Part 1 from what we call performance tasks last year to what we're calling integrated items. Those integrated items will still be multiple step items. They will still require open response from students, but we believe that they'll be more efficient and that they'll still be able to be machine scoreable and they can be independently scored. So this is how we're kind of moving into that. We felt like the performance task was more of a formative type of item versus needing to have a summative type of item to measure mastery at the end of the year. We will continue to have those calculator prohibited and calculator permitted sections. So we are still looking at fluency and making sure that students actually understand and aren't just relying on a calculator for computations. And then the three subparts. So we have broken the math test down into these three smaller subparts that are less than 50 minutes so that schools can schedule the math assessment into a regular bell schedule. So those are the highlights of the changes for math coming up this year. For ELA, we have eliminated Part 1, but we want to make sure that people understand that we haven't eliminated writing. Writing is in our standards. It's one of the key skills that we know that students need to be successful in post-secondary and careers. So the way that we're structuring it now is that writing is one of the 4 subparts for ELA at the end of the year, and that we're asking schools to complete the writing subpart in the first week of the 3-week window that we've planned for the spring semester, and we also have a 3-week window planned for the end of the fall semester for those fall block EOCs. We're going to make sure that we'll be field testing writing prompts separately from the operational test. We had gotten to a place last year where we got a lot of feedback that it felt like the stamina for students to be able to complete both of those essays back to back just didn't feel like it made sense, and it added to the testing time. So now we're going to have a standalone field testing construct where we only need to include about 1/3 of students each year in order to do those writing prompts so that all students don't have to do it attached to the operational assessment. We are talking a little bit about the rubric here. There's a rubric for traits that we use to measure writing. And we had determined that we were going to be phasing in a double weighting of 2 of those traits. Focus and organization and development are 2 of the areas where students tend to have a harder time because that is really beyond grammar. It is how are you developing your thoughts. And so we had told the field that we would be phasing in kind of a double weighting of those more complex components of the 4 traits, but we are going to delay that double weighting until next year. We'll start with high school and then move to middle school, but we will make sure that grades 3 through 5 actually maintains the same weighting as students learn writing before we start to hold them more accountable for being able to fully develop their thoughts in written form. And then finally, as a part of reducing the time, we won't have quite as many reading passages in the ELA test. We're going to streamline the reading passages and have it be questions attached to those passages. So that's how we're getting to that reduced time for ELA. With social studies, as I already mentioned, we will be doing the field test for grades 3 through 8. U.S. history will be operational. It will still have a writing prompt associated with U.S. history, and we'll be field testing those writing prompts separately for U.S. history as well, including about 1/3 of the students each year so that all students don't have to participate in that. That's the update. Questions?
Wendy?
I have quite a few, so you can cut me off whenever you want.
Okay.
So on the report
Thank you
card.
for that opportunity.
You're gonna wish that had worked. So on the report card, I saw you had, the report card will include in the course for high school, and then it said raw data for 3 through 8. What do you mean by that? And
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so let me clarify. The report card, what we were saying is that we actually, for high school EOC, will be able to completely score. So we will have performance level data for high school. And that's what we typically report on the report card, is actually how did students meet the standards that the teachers set for the cut scores. For grades 3 through 8, this actually won't be included on the report card, but what we will be giving back to districts and schools are what we deemed raw data, because all of our grade 3 through 8 students did take part 1, recall, and we had a part 1 for ELA, social studies, and math. So at the very least, we wanted to be able to provide just the number correct for students out of the number of items that they took on that part 1, so that schools and districts could have some data around how students performed on that component. So we felt like, to honor the time that had been put into the administration of part 1, that we needed to make sure that we scored those tests. For those districts who took any of the part 2 for grades 3 through 8, we're doing the same thing. But that raw data is totally different from the full reporting that we'll be able to do for high school. We won't be able to do the full reporting for grades 3 through 8 until next summer, after we have this full administration this year.
So the report card will just have high school data for this past year and like a big asterisk for 3 through 8. And that, has there been a decision on what that will do moving forward to the 3-year averages for priority schools, or to reward school status, or to any of those metrics that take more than 1 year's worth of data?
So I think that we mentioned with priority schools that what we had planned to do is that, of course, we have 2 different pools for priority schools. There's a grade 3-8 pool and a high school pool. So for high school, we will have that 3 years of actual performance level data. For the grade 3-8 pool, we will only have 2 years of data, and that will include 2014-15, and it will include 2016-17. So we'll essentially run a 2-year success rate next summer for the 3-8 pool. The other element that we decided is that even for high schools who have 3 years of data, we would run the success rate 2 ways. We would run it with all 3 years, and then we would run it taking out 15-16 in terms of the same kind of philosophy that we've had around teachers, that we only use it if it helps you. And if we had schools that, having removed 15-16 data, then came up to be above the bottom 5%, that would be a safe harbor for them, and we would not name them priority schools. So I think that there will be a lot of conversation around priority schools as we look through our state plan and the comprehensive support schools for ESSA. And I think that there may be an opportunity to revisit, now that we're required to do school accountability at the state level. We may revisit in terms of how we think about that priority school calculation as a 3-year success rate, as opposed to perhaps integrating it with the A through F grading system that we're getting ready to develop as we think about school accountability for our ESSA plan. So I think there'll be some opportunities for us to talk about that and revisit that more broadly over this next year.
So the ASD timeline is still kind of up in the air as far as what this will do to that, right? Other than next year, I understand.
Commissioner Clean, I'll defer to you. Yes.
I mean, we've announced what we're doing next
for
year.
next year,
So
right.
Other than that,
Mhm.
we've not had any announcement.
Okay, so those conversations are still happening. I'm still going here, keep going on. Yeah, you said field testing, social studies 3 through 8. So just for those of us who aren't in the educator world, that means no scores?
That's right. It's not an operational test. So field test is data that we use to build the next operational test. But we obviously want to use authentic student data to make sure that we're developing a test that reflects what the standards are, and that we know a sense of whether those questions are good questions before we put them on an operational assessment. So there won't be any proficiency data associated with social studies this year.
And then you mentioned 30% less testing time, and then you mentioned shorter subparts. I'm going to try to put these into one question so it doesn't look like I'm hogging the floor quite as much. But it's actually 2 questions. 30% is a lot. And I know there are people cheering about that, and there are people moaning about it, and I'm not. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out. I understand the summative versus formative issues, but how can you ensure parents, because that's where I'm looking at, that you're still going to get the same quality? And for the people who have issues with testing accountability, I mean, the less test questions, the more important each one becomes, right? Like, just statistically, if you miss 1 out of 10 versus 1 out of 20, it's a different animal. So how are you guys approaching that from teacher perspective and parent perspective?
So I'll talk about the quality this way. The quality of the assessment that we'll be administering this year is still light years ahead of the quality that we had 2 years ago on the historical TCAP. We are still going to be asking those question types that are beyond multiple choice. We're still going to have multiple select questions. We're still going to have open response questions. We're still going to maintain a level of rigor. So as a parent, I would say this is still on the trajectory that we've been talking about, where we want to provide them better information about truly our students on track for post-secondary and career readiness. The reporting that we're going to do, they're still going to see all of that reflected. I think that last year we talked about the timing estimates that we had created for our schedules, that we were giving students, in some cases, 3 times more of a time per item than on the historical TCAP. And what we realized is that students didn't necessarily need to utilize all that time. We just weren't sure. So one of the examples is on the writing prompt. We did 90 minutes last year for high school. Well, when we look back at the data in terms of what students spent time on task, it was about 70 minutes. And so now we've taken that time down to 85 minutes to include, administration time. And similarly for, grades 3 through 8, we kept it at 75 minutes, but we knew students were really taking more like 50 and 60 minutes based on what was reported to us from the field. For those other multiple choice and multiple select questions, we were able to condense some of that time because we just realized that students could actually complete the task in a shorter time than what we had initially estimated. I'll also say that the number of items, we have talked about the fact that psychometrically you need to have about 50 to 55 items to make sure that you actually get enough information to make any kind of valid and reliable claim about what students know and are able to do. And we are at that, right? This is an efficient test. We think it's a smarter test. We think we, streamline, but you make an important point that in order to maintain quality, we are at the place where we have balanced quality, timing, the psychometrics, and that this is where we are. So I would say that for some who are cheering the 30%, that some might say, what about another 30%? Can't maintain the quality with another 30% reduction. I said this before, that if folks still feel uncomfortable with the amount of time, then we have to start looking at which content areas are we assessing in our state.
So if we're talk about cut school. 55 questions, stuff that cut score where?
It will depend. So a cut score, and we talked a little bit about this at another session, going through what is the process of setting a cut score. But essentially what we're doing is that with those 55 questions that you have in an assessment, you get some information about how students responded, the difficulty level of the questions based on actual student responses. And what we do is that we take those questions and we create what's called an ordered item booklet. We rank questions from what seem to be the easiest based on student responses to the most difficult. Then teachers take those performance level descriptors that we talked about, and they sit down and they read what we've defined qualitatively in terms of what students know and that they're able to do. So they look at those skills we've defined at each of the levels. We defined a level for level 1, what was the below basic level, for level 2, basic, what does it take to be proficient, level 3, and advanced level 4. So we have that written out qualitatively what those skills look like. Then teachers actually look at the questions in the ordered item booklet, and they compare that to the skills that we've said students need to have at each performance level. And when they do that, they get to a point where they say, this is the break between being a level 1 and a level 2, because these set of skills represented by these questions, that seems like level 1 performance. Once you get beyond that, it seems like level 2 performance, so on and so forth for level 3 and level 4. So I'm saying that to you to say that it's not a number, right? It's not about the raw score number. That's the part that makes standardized testing sometimes very hard for folks to grasp, because it's not like saying on your regular classroom test, 75% correct is passing. That's actually not how it works. You really are looking at what do the items represent in terms of the skills, and how does that measure up against what qualitatively you define as what is that student skill set at the different performance levels. And that's the work that we have teachers come in and do.
Okay.
2 more, I think. So on the shorter subpart, so I get all that. I talked to a lot of teachers and administrators after this past year's testing experience, just to get their feedback on positives, negatives. I'm sure you guys did that too. And one of the things I heard was that the large window, which was intended by the department to give flexibility, actually resulted in more test prep time just because the teacher's wanting their kids to do well for, obvious reasons. And so I'm wondering if you're gonna have this window where they're gonna be able to do things do you think that is going to exacerbate that problem, where they're gonna think, oh, we have this part during fifth periods next week, so we're gonna spend this whole week, or do you think it'll alleviate, or do you think it won't matter?
So, in terms of the administration windows, we did cut the administration windows. Last year, we had 2 4-week windows for part 1 and part 2. We had 1 3-week window for the administration. The culture of test prep is one that I think is a much larger question. And I think this has a lot more to do with what's happening in schools in terms of creating the culture and what, school leaders and instructional leadership environment than it has to do with anything in the test. Because I will be honest with you, we've looked at and we've now started to review the data that's coming back from high school EOC. This is just not a test that you can prep for. You actually have to know the content. And if we can gain trust of educators that the time best spent is the time helping students master the content standards, that will be the way that students are able to demonstrate what they know and what they're able to do. This is not about a certain question type. You can't guess it. I mean, students just have to really know the content very well. And we will get feedback come this fall when folks see our results from high school ELC. It was more difficult. It's more difficult when the answer is not in front of you and you're being asked to create the graph. You're being asked to actually, open-ended with the answer. You have to put your calculator away. And that is kind of showing our slip a little bit, as they say in the South, that we have not necessarily taught the content to a deep enough level where the students are nimble enough that give me a calculator or not, I can do this question, right? This can be text that I've seen before or not. I can read and make meaning of it. So I think that we're in a paradigm shift. It's one that we're trying to communicate strongly around in terms of test prep, that what we've got to focus on is quality instruction every day. And we've got to focus on teaching the content deeply, and that's how we're going to demonstrate that students really have mastered the standards.
Wendy, and I would like to add one other item that I think was problematic this past year with the delivery issues that I would imagine would not be the same this year, is that when we had the delays of the test delivery, particularly for part 1, people were continuing to teach standards that were leading up to part 1 as opposed to moving to part 2. So we did hear that, where just because of those delays, again, particularly 3A, those delays caused this, I can't move forward. I'm still going to try to keep reviewing this, and we would only hope that that does not occur this year because the delivery challenges will be eliminated.
That makes sense. And I think some of it was also the online. They were spending time learning how to use online. Last question. Questar, were they in the mix last year? And if they were, what was the reason they weren't chosen and the other vendor was?
So the initial RFP process was in 2014, and so Questar was one of the respondents during that process. And I will say that was, prior to my or the commissioner being at the department, and there was a set of folks who were rating those responses based on the proposals that were received. And based on a rating scale. And that is the correct way to do it in terms of our procurement process. I think the difficulty of being a rater, if I were in their shoes in 2014, is that all you had was what people wrote and said. And people can write wonderful proposals that seem very lovely in theory, but no one had actually had their feet against the fire and said, I've actually done this. And so I think it would have been harder to discriminate between the quality of respondents based on just their written proposals as opposed to being able to have real life information in terms of who's performed and who hasn't. So we have the benefit in 2016 that those raters didn't have, that we actually are able to see who's been able to deliver and who hasn't. And so we took full advantage of that, which I feel like is part of the reason why the result may look different, because you have this real life experience that's happened over the last 2 years, and that's legitimate. So we had that opportunity to take advantage of that.
Great, that's all I have.
Okay, good questions. You asked a lot of the questions I had, so I appreciate it. And Dr. Allen, great job of explaining this. Appreciate that. And when I listen to you, I think I've got it all fixed. I know what I'm doing. But the half-life of that understanding is short. Is there do y'all have any one-page document or something that you could kind of put this all together that I can use to remind myself what it is? Or-
We have many documents.
If it-
Sarah, we'll make sure the board gets everything that we have put out on the topic.
Okay, if you get it on one page, it would, well,
We're working on it.
right now, I think I understand it, but.
No, I do.
Microfilm.
Okay.
Yeah, but we will
Showing
get
our
back
age.
to documentation.
Showing our age. Don't say things like that.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, good, we appreciate it, good job. Okay, another big subject, ESSA. Candace, you gonna,
I'll
Talk
introduce
about
it
that, or-
all. I believe you have a PowerPoint that you will walk through. Most of you know some information about ESSA. We are certainly in a moment where we are transitioning to create our ESSA plan under the Every Student Succeeds Act. It will be obviously available to you in a draft form with much of your input being invested through the process of stakeholder engagement that's leading up to that draft. We're hoping to have the draft of this document, this large plan, by the end of the calendar year, and then we'll move it toward a submission to the U.S. Department of Education. Our ideal would be March. They have a March submission and a July submission. Eve Carney is leading our work at the department in terms of really putting together all the pieces. We have started some massive stakeholder engagement and work groups several months ago, and we're in the phase now where we're really trying to hone in on some key parts and put them together in some kind of draft form or straw man and let people look at them and give feedback. So Eve, I'll let you walk through where we are.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. It's nice to be here with you all today to talk for the first time of what I know will be many conversations we will have about the Every Student Succeeds Act as well as our state plan. Today we're going to start with kind of a high-level overview of the Every Student Succeeds Act, talk a little bit about how we are going about the development of our state plan, and also what we feel the role of the state board will be. And as Dr. McQueen just noted, I know that you all will be intimately involved as we get this plan underway. As she noted, it is quite a large undertaking, and we are just getting moving on doing that work. Really, the overarching goal of this is to create a plan that really does align and support our department's strategic plan. There has been extensive work done with a number of stakeholders on the development of our strategic plan, Tennessee Succeeds, and we feel like this should just be a companion or an overlay to that plan, not something that's created as a one-off that really isn't tied to what our long-term goals are and our larger initiatives at the department. So really it's that plus the stakeholder engagement piece that we are very interested in engaging with stakeholders across the state, and we'll talk a little more about where we are right now and where we're going with that. So some of our guiding principles really is that alignment with our strategic plan, our vision at the department, continuing that support of college and career readiness, as well as feedback and making sure that excellence and equity, part of our vision statement at the department. ESSA is very much about ensuring equity for all students, and so that's a big part of what we keep in the front of our minds as we develop this plan. We also are looking at one of the requirements in the Every Student Succeeds Act is for the accountability model is the addition of another indicator of school quality and student success. And so looking for that extra indicator that will give schools an opportunity to demonstrate success in a way that maybe they haven't had the opportunity to in the past. Minimize those unintended consequences as we develop this plan. I do think it's a point in time where we really have the opportunity to do two things. Take stock of where we are currently and what's going very well, but also add to that to make a more streamlined and cohesive plan to really support our students in Tennessee. So what is the Every Student Succeeds Act? I know it gets some press here and there, but it started December the 10th, 2015, when President Obama signed this bipartisan bill into law, and really it was not, probably would not have happened, but for the efforts of our own Senator Alexander and Patty Murray from the state of Washington. Really happened in a very quick time frame. It was very surprising that it passed so very quickly. And I think initially they were very ambitious to say, well, we're going to start that July 1st, 2016, until, it took about a week for clearer heads to prevail and realize that what they were asking are significant changes that districts, states, schools will all need time to adapt with. But one thing that it does is it really does give states more authority to make those key decisions around accountability, standards, assessment. More authority also means more responsibility on the state agency, and so we too are, beginning to accept that often with that, freedom and ability to make those key decisions also comes more responsibility. We are in the process of that stakeholder engagement phase. We'll talk about the timeline in a little bit, but it is something that we are actively seeking feedback from a number of different avenues so that we have a plan that truly is reflective of our state, of our goals that we already have laid out in our strategic plan. Again, states in the driver's seat. Often, historically, these were decisions that were handed down to states to implement, and then we handed those down to districts. And so now we get to make some of those key decisions. Also, some of those big acronyms that have weighed upon us are gone, and that would be AYP, Adequate Yearly Progress, highly qualified teachers, supplemental education services. Now, some of that went away because of our flex waiver that we had in place, but now those are officially not part of the new law, and so that's really helpful for states not to have those restrictive programs. They also eliminated some of the smaller, very kind of restrictive grant and included those in the larger block grants. A couple of examples would be the Math and Science Partnership Grant, for example. It had a very specific scope, but now it's part of this larger Title II grant, and that's good for states, it's good for districts, because then you can give them the flexibility to implement what they need within their own districts. Also, school improvement grants. Historically, those have been, at least for the last 10 years, have been its own grant program, and it has also now been absorbed by the larger Title I program. We'll talk more about school improvement a little bit later. A couple of the other things that the law did, it maintained those large streams of federal dollars, so the Title I formula stayed the same. How it gets parsed out changed slightly, but the funding remained, as did the addition of more competitive grant programs for states to take advantage of. And we'll talk, there are a couple of places that we will mention a little bit later on some of those competitive opportunities that states will have. The one thing that was interesting that sprinkled throughout the 1,059 pages was time and time again limitations on the Secretary of Education's authority to grant waivers. They did not like that. The Congress felt that it was a egregious overstepping of authority, and they ensured that they didn't just put it in there once, it's in there multiple times. So very limited authority for our new Secretary of Education to grant waivers. So that the flex waiver that Tennessee has been living under for the last several years is null and void on August the 1st, which is kind of an interesting place because, well, the new law really doesn't kick in full until the 17-18 school year. So where does that leave us now? We are in this period called the orderly transition period. It sounds very neat and tidy, and we're going to all transition in an orderly fashion. That was made available in the Consolidated Appropriations Act that was passed in December of 2015, just to give states that ability to transition in an effective way. And so there is no confusion as to what is happening, giving us time to do that. When they had a couple of exceptions to that, so what they expect is that for full implementation by the 17-18 school year. Competitive grant programs, it's October the 1st of this year. For grants awarded after October 1 are under the new law. But the large, big federal block grants are next July 17-18 school year. In this orderly transition, they did actually spell out a couple of things that really go into effect now, which would be the first one being anything that you said you were going to do in support of your priority and focus schools, in your flex waiver, you must continue. So even though we're in this transition period, if you, in your flex waiver, and Tennessee did, laid out supports for priority and focus schools, you are bound to continue that service to those schools even in this transition period. The other piece that they said going forward, starting in this upcoming school year, which is very, very soon, is that the highly qualified teacher requirement will be no more. States and districts will still have to report data for the 15-16 school year, but going forward, that will not be a federal requirement for highly qualified. Instead, state licensure, credentialing, certification would be what teachers must meet in order to be teaching certain classes. So our timeline, it is a short timeline. Currently, I was at a meeting, I'll tell you this, just to kind of frame this. It was interesting because when we were talking about the timeline being short, to write such a comprehensive plan, they also shared with us, U.S. Department of Ed also said, now, we're not going to be giving out extensive guidance this year. We cannot be expected to reproduce, we had 13, 14 years of guidance under the old law, and we cannot replicate that in 3 months, 6 months, or even a year. And so as these new regulations come out around this new law, we have opportunity as a state to submit comments, but they really are kind of trickling in. And so they've started with some of the larger accountability assessment items and are moving through that. So I say all of that to say there's been very little talk about the timeline and the short timeline that it is. But where we are currently is in the stakeholder input phase of this process. And as the commissioner noted, we will continue that through September, begin writing the draft of that plan late fall, and by the end of the calendar year, expect that we will have a draft for public comment as well as engagement with the state board. That happens December, January. Right now our thoughts would be that we would bring our plan to the state board for hopefully the January 2017 meeting, so that we will meet a March submission deadline by the U.S. Department of Ed.
Yeah, and let me mention on that, our intent is anything that we're considering that, a metric change, something around accountability, if there's anything that we have that feels solid, then we would bring that to you in the October meeting before we actually have the plan drafted. Because you can see, we will be in the phase of writing the plan right during our October meeting. And so if there are things we think, okay, go ahead and share, these are obviously items that are going to be in the plan, we're going to make that public anyways in a month or so. And then something that's more comprehensive you will see at the January meeting.
Thank you for noting that. I mentioned the stakeholder engagement. We are in that phase right now. We have established some working groups, and we will walk through those in a moment. But that's happening right now across, led by TDOE staff, leadership at our department, but really around 66 external stakeholders across the state, across these 6 working groups to inform the plan, as well as a multitude of other meetings where we're asking for feedback. And we'll talk a little more. So this graphic was created, and I really like this graphic because I think it really does capture what we're trying to do, and in this process, we just keep students in the center of our conversations, keep students in the center of our decisions. All of the players have a role, and they're all the same size, but they're very different in their purpose and intent. When you think about the federal level, it's really about ensuring civil rights for all students. When you think about the state role, here we are thinking about policy and other decisions that will shape our accountability and our standards, assessment, et cetera. Districts have the big job of setting local policies to support that, as well as key hiring decisions to continue to support the work more broadly. And at the school, we know that's really where the action happens, in the classroom to make this work. And there are pieces in that school piece that are just critical. And that would be around what kind of climate is created in that building, what type of leadership is in that building, the teacher, the morale, all of those pieces that really do make for effective instruction. So I mentioned the working groups. We have established, kind of based on the large little buckets of work in the plan, 6 working groups comprised of 66 individuals we hope to gather different voices: policy, practitioner, advocacy, parent, student, others who will kind of come together to really kind of talk through some of those key areas that we know we need feedback on and input on to inform the development of our plan. One of the things that we've asked of all of these 66 individuals who have agreed to partner with the department in meeting is for them then to go back into their networks and do the same thing. Convene a group. We tried to give them resources so that they could then convene their own group and bring that feedback back into their working group. So I'll talk a little bit about those working groups, starting with standards and assessment. Nakia mentioned this one earlier. Laura and Nate Schwartz and Laura Oncolate are leading the work on standards and assessment, thinking about how do we improve current practices, where there are opportunities to improve, flexibility on the testing options that are in the new law, whether that's the innovative assessment demonstration, if that's something that they're interested in pursuing, the state would be interested in pursuing, as well as other assessment practices for students and subgroups. The accountability working group is led by Nakia and Mary Badawala, and that really is to think about our current accountability system. It was just last summer that a new accountability model was developed, and where we are now and what seems to be right and what we feel like we've started some very solid work there. And while the Every Student Succeeds Act requires an additional measure, and we know that that will be a big part of the work, it is also Nakia and another subgroup that will work on the A through F report card for schools. And so there's a lot of work here, but this is an area where we feel like we have a solid start with the work that's already been done. English learners, led by 2 folks in our department, Jan Lanier and Joanne Runyon, gathering information from the advocacy communities and teachers and others. We had this one at the department just this week. I was able to sit in on that, and it was a really wonderful conversation, especially when you think about there was a teacher there from Metro Nashville, from Overton High School, who just had such amazing feedback to bring to the group. We had higher ed representatives, other groups, but just a really robust conversation about how English learners are best served in Tennessee, as well as how do we address the new requirements in the Every Student Succeeds Act for English language proficiency. Educator support and effectiveness is Paul Fleming and Sylvia Flowers. This group has already met also, but really a great conversation and thoughts and input around what Tennessee currently does to support its teachers, what works and where are there opportunities as well there, strategies for recruitment, retention, and equitable distribution of effective educators. The Tennessee had submitted its teacher equity plan. We know that it is intended that the U.S. Department of Ed, they want this equity plan so that it's not a one-off document over here with your state plan here, to really be embedded into the state plan that we will submit. Additional supports that we feel like teachers may need that they aren't currently getting, and what does that look like? A great conversation again. We had superintendents, we had principals, we had higher ed, we had TEA and PET both present as well. So it was a great conversation of about, I guess, 10, is that right? 10 folks in a room that just spent a lot of time having some really good conversation around that. School improvement actually meets today. Malika Anderson and Rita Fentress from the department are leading this working group to think about some of the things that Nakia noted from your questions around priority schools and what that will look like. Evidence-based practices, new language in the law around evidence-based practices. Now that these decisions are no longer these federal prescribed models, and they're going to be models that districts will develop, what do the supports look like for districts? Because they've been very used to this very kind of, I've got to follow this prescribed model. What does the support from the department look like? What kind of guardrails, what kind of guidance are there? Do we want to give them to shape a plan that really will impact achievement in the lowest performing schools, as well as exit criteria, timeline for low performing schools, including schools that are in the midst currently of implementing one of those 4 federal models. So a lot of work in this committee, a lot of work that we know we will engage you, the state board, as well as other stakeholders in, because this is an area that probably with the school improvement grant going away, less requirements from the federal level, there is going to be a great deal of decisions that will be needed here as we move forward. The last one is student support, and Danielle Mesra and Mike Herman from the department will facilitate this group. There are a couple of places in the new law where there is more of an emphasis on either direct services to students or the new grant, the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Block Grant, that really is focused on that well-rounded education. And so Danielle and Mike will be convening their group next week to talk about the current supports that are impacting achievement. What does it mean for a what does that mean, well-rounded education? What are the considerations that the state should have in the development of its plan around this theory, as well as, again, a brand new block grant. What is the role of the state in helping districts in the implementation of that? So those groups are going on now. They're going to meet in person 2 times, as well as additional meetings via webinar if needed. But again, as they bring that feedback back to their working group, we were very interested in kind of coming up with how do these 6 groups inform the development of our plan. But that really just is the first step in the stakeholder engagement process. We have the feedback form on the website where we encourage anyone that you engage with that says, I have some things I'd like to say. This is where we should direct those comments, because we have folks on the commissioner's team and myself that will be reviewing and coding all of this feedback as we craft this plan in the coming months. In addition to that, we have met, as I said, multiple opportunities to meet and to capture input and feedback from a number of groups. That continues as we have other people who reach out, whether it's to the commissioner or to myself, who say, hey, we want to give some feedback. And so we really are diligently trying to give them the opportunity to have some input into the plan.
Let me stop you there while you have the slide. I do want to note that we have partnered with SCORE, who also is partnering with different groups. We have 5 very specific feedback stakeholder sessions happening over the next few weeks. And those sessions, I think I'm leading 4 or maybe all 5 of them, I actually can't remember, but these are feedback loops that we're receiving. We've got higher ed, a group that really is about school choice and those voices. There's an advocacy group. There's certainly a group around business, our business leaders across the state. So we're looking forward to feedback also from those groups and our partnerships. We have already received some exceptional feedback from our directors of schools, and we have written that in a report that this feedback, from them at the very beginning of June has helped guide where they think we are and where they feel like we need to improve. We've certainly gotten feedback from a variety of teacher groups, our own Teacher Advisory Council, our Governor's Teachers Council. We are absolutely talking to our TEA and PET and allowing every voice to be heard. And we're looking forward, if you have an opportunity, you'd say, I'd love for you to come and provide some time with the group and literally get that feedback. We're trying to code everything, make sure we are giving these back to the work groups, and we are using that information to make decisions. So what you're saying to us and how you're involving the department and even getting that feedback will be crucial to make sure Danielle's work group and Paul's work group and Laura and Nate's work group and Nakia's work group actually are hearing those voices while their work group members are also attempting to do the same thing. We know that large-scale stakeholder engagement is a challenge, but we have a layered approach that we hope will bring in a good bit of feedback.
We also have a separate feedback form online for parents and students
Yes.
that is really more, more at the school level and about how do you feel about your child's education and what you're receiving from your school. Currently, it's on the website in English and Spanish, and we are working on adding some additional languages in the coming weeks. We actually are trying to get that so we can get that out there as quickly as we can, but really feel like that's a voice we don't want to lose in this conversation. So as the commissioner just noted, this feedback, this listening tour started with her listening tour across the state with 3 regional meetings with superintendents. There were 124 individuals present representing 115 of the districts. And it was a great couple of hours in each of the regions where we actually asked very specific questions in a couple of key areas. And really, they were they gave really strong feedback. And it was interesting. When we first started, you would wonder, okay, is it going to be the same across the state? And in many places it was very much the same. And a report has been drafted that reflects all of this feedback. And the questions, we kind of tried to hone in on a couple of key areas, which were accountability and assessment. So on the left-hand side of the questions that we ask, really around how should we continue strengthening ways to measure student progress toward meeting standards, and how can we strengthen the current assessment system. And on the right, you'll see some repeats of what Nakia just went over, just around decreasing the overall test time. We heard that across the state, as well as possibly reducing the number of tests at certain grades. 11th grade kept coming up as one of particular note, as well as improving logistics and administration, which we expected. The next one was really one that we're trying to figure out the best way to do this, and we've taken some steps to do that, but really just the communication of the why behind the tests. And so part of that will be, districts included on their website, not just the schedule, but the why behind the tests. They also wanted alignment between the assessments, as well as a state question or item bank. On the 2 accountability questions that were asked, given that we have a new accountability system that was developed last summer but really hasn't had the opportunity to be run, what can we do to strengthen that, as well as with that additional measure that we have to add, the system quality measure and then the school quality measure. And on the right, again, was kind of the summary of their feedback. The need for consistency, the need for some stability so that they could have kind of a uneventful test cycle and just let's stay with where we are, utilizing the same measure for the district and the school level. So again, both at the district level accountability in the Every Student Succeeds Act, as well as at the school level, there is this requirement for this additional measure. And the conversation was always around, should that be the same measure at the district and the school level or not? Generally it needs to be the same measure, was what we heard from superintendents. And the last point there was some conversation around allowing districts to choose from a menu of options. That sounds like a great idea. I think there are some limitations at the federal level on that, because you want to be able to apply whatever measure consistently across the grade bands. So you can actually have different measures for your elementary and your high schools. You just simply have to apply those consistently across the state and not kind of a pick one or another. And so as I noted, this is the first conversation of what I know will be a meaningful engagement with you as we develop this plan, as we bring some of those key items to you in the development of that. But that is really what we hope is a partnership to do just that. In addition to that, we have representation from this group on our CPM advisory committee. In the law, it's called the Committee of Practitioners. It is required in the new law that that body here is involved, which we did anyway. And of course, a feedback input session. This was kind of just the introduction, but really hope to schedule some time to really capture your feedback as well. While the approval by a state board is not required in ESSA, it is our practice, and we want to continue that this body review and approve our plan as we did with our plan, accountability, etc. review the key initiatives is a current practice, as I just noted, and that's something we want to continue. We're hoping for January 2017 to have that ready. I'm happy to take any questions you may have. The one thing I keep coming back to is that there's really nothing in this law that's not somehow in our strategic plan. And so it's really going to be just how can this new law and the flexibilities that are in this law help strengthen our plan so that we continue to focus on what in Tennessee is important to us. And that's what's laid out in our plan. So I'm happy to take your questions.
Okay, Wendy?
You're right. So, thank you.
Uh-huh.
I want to applaud you and the department for all of the different stakeholders that you brought to the table. But one of the questions I get a lot about ESSA is how it intersects with IDEA and special ed students and accountability around special ed, and I didn't see any stakeholder groups around special ed, so I would encourage you to somehow engage the disability community. I'm happy to help make those connections. I think you guys have, you have connections to that community,
Sure.
but I do think from the parent perspective and from the advocacy perspective, people are concerned about what ESSA will mean, and some of it's just lack of understanding of like what they can't change out of IDEA, and some of it is just understanding that the accountability stuff isn't going to be top down anymore.
There are some places, I appreciate your question, because I do think that's something that maybe we're not doing a great job communicating, because I know just recently Paul and Sylvia went to the Special Education Task Force meeting and solicited input at that, and that was a couple of weeks ago.
Great, I just didn't see it on the list, so that's why I didn't know.
I think we just need to add some things to the slide.
I
on
think
that.
so too.
I just started doing that, and
Great.
when you said that, I thought probably not reflected on that slide, but
Okay, yeah, if
certainly.
you're doing it, wonderful, that's just.
But there are places that are impacted, even the highly qualified has some impact as well as assessment and accountability. But the other piece that we really, I think, need to do a better job of just really communicating. I know we've had internal conversations, and we are also doing input sessions from within the department, and so special populations within TDOE will have the opportunity for input as well. Right now, we're kind of on that external loop, but I believe we're doing a kind of a two-phase approach internally because not everyone has read it, so shocking, huh? But it is something that we hope to kind of get them some background on the key areas, and then we actually will have a separate session about a week later for input. But I appreciate the question and definitely will take a look at that, but also I will update the slide.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Okay, great. Other questions for you? Okay, Sarah?
This is sort of an open question, but I just keep wondering, kind of given that we were tied before to the flexibility waiver, and we had some things sort of written out that we were accountable to in the sort of the eyes of the federal government, sort of open question, but are there needs to put state parameters, whether it's policy or otherwise, on a new accountability system that you're encountering? As you think about this, and Commissioner,
So I would say, obviously, the time frame is allowing us to think about, would something require one legislation as we go into next session to be ready for the 17-18 school year. So we're anticipating some type of bill that would be ESSA related. Obviously, that'll come out of this work session, as well as potential state board policy changes as a result. So we would anticipate both of those.
that's kind of what I expected, but I just thought it might be good to think about it as we approach October and kind of get the updates and just, that makes sense.
Just one thing to add to that, a big part of what is in the Every Student Succeeds Act is not just at the state level, the importance of this plan, but at the district level and the school level, the need for the development of a plan that's based on the needs assessment. I know that that's a couple of areas specifically that we will be coming to you with in terms of updating planning requirements and within the state board policy for districts and schools.
Okay, great.
Changes regarding Title I programming and funding.
So the funding, again, the formula remains the same. And when they collapsed the school improvement grant separate from Title I, it used to exist separately, they are going, the plan, what we've been told is that they will increase our Title I allocation because now we are required as a state to take 7% off the top of our allocation for the support of what we will call, well, it's our priority and focus schools in the law. It's a comprehensive and targeted support for schools. And so they kind of merge those two together, and so our overall allocation will go up, but then we're also on top of that required to then take 7% off the top for those. So there's some small adjustments to the formula, but they kept the funding model the same for Title I, and the funding is increased only to kind of absorb that other grant that no longer exists
And then will
separately.
it be distributed to our schools and districts in the same manner?
Yes. There's still 4 subpots of Title I that's based on poverty, based on census poverty, and those funds are still spiraled in the same way they have been since the reauthorization 2002.
Okay? Very good. Eve, we
Thank you very
certainly
much.
appreciate it. Good job. We certainly do applaud the involvement that you've got with everybody. Do we need to take a break here, or? Okay, we are behind schedule. We don't have a break plan, so let's keep it very short. Let's talk about 5 minutes here.
You actually love the movie.
Okay.
To have a break and then.
Okay, I'm sorry, Cato, we didn't prove it.
Time to go.
They got their time schedule, I got mine. I'm wonderful. You gonna be here tomorrow? But I'm gonna preach about blowing. Not up.
In a good way. Yeah, because they not up.
Up in capacity. I got
Are
it.
you gonna like discuss that?
Stay this year.
One thing that's good about it, more time,
Skills gap report.
Yeah.
Non-faculty.
Survey results, Nate, you're on.
Great, thank you. As you all know from the last time I was here, we are one of the few states that actually does a census level survey, a survey of all of our teachers and all of our administrators every year. And we do this for a whole bunch of purposes, but the biggest one is really to track our progress, to see whether the areas that we think anecdotally we're seeing improve across the state we're seeing changes in educator perceptions, and to see where the areas that we're being pushed by educators to improve on actually are. A whole bunch of states are starting up initiatives just like this in answer to seeing what Tennessee does. So this has felt exciting for that reason. The other exciting thing about this year, sorry, this is a little small. The other exciting thing about this year is that districts, for the first time, last year we made a website public which provides district level survey information, district and school level survey information, and that is becoming something that's really important to superintendents. So we have a whole bunch of superintendents this year waiting on their results, which will go public soon in order to assess their own needs and look at whether or not what they're seeing in their district actually matches with what we're seeing at the state level. So, things to know about the survey. The survey window was open for about a month and a half in April and May. As you remember, April and May was an important and difficult month for Tennessee education because it's when most of the testing fallout happened. And so keep that in mind. I don't think that has hugely affected survey results, which feels interesting, feels like a story in itself, and we'll talk more about that. But that was when the survey window was open. And this survey, the way it works is everyone gets what we call a main survey or a core survey, and then we ping randomized samples of teachers with special topics that we want to dig in more about. So we look specifically on topics like professional learning, assessments, personalized learning, evaluation, high school and the culture of career and college readiness, literacy, and pre-con. Participation rates. Participation rates dropped off, so here you see 2012, 2016. Participation rates dropped off slightly this past year, and the reason for that actually is mostly technical. It had to do with the way we were collecting, this goes out to educators by email, it had to do with the way we were collecting educator email addresses. That said, the 48% of teachers who responded, that represents almost 30,000 teachers, and 53% administrators is, I think, about 4,000 administrators. We work with the technical research firm Westat to both look at the representativeness of our survey results and to weight the survey results to ensure that what we're seeing is really the way Tennessee teachers as a whole feel, and we feel very confident about that. This is just a screenshot, don't try to read this. This is a screenshot of the website from last year. So this is going to be opening at the beginning of August, just as schools get back in session. That allows schools and districts, again, you can select your own school, select your district, and you can look at what your teachers said on a particular subject. And actually this year you'll also be able to see your comparison to state or district results. So I didn't notice this about the headlines until now. So fonts looked different when they were on my computer.
Apparently the state suggested Open Sans font never shows up appropriately on anyone's computer. So this is Open Sans and it never works. So that's why it looks like that. I apologize. All of our PowerPoints look like that.
I apologize. Well, I will translate if there's anything really important in the headlines. I don't think we've missed anything yet. So major takeaways. And the last thing to note, as I said, so we are making this a public website. We'll be releasing a report and turning this into a public story at the beginning of August. So what you're seeing here is really a first look. What we pulled together was the initial way we were starting to tell stories from this survey, the initial things that we thought were interesting. I think we are both, we've been continuing to iterate around what it is that we're actually finding, and so probably you'll hear slight shifts as we incorporate new information from new analyses into these storylines as we go into August. But here's what we initially pulled out as some of the most important things. A few really positive things. Climate, as I said, this was a difficult time for teachers. the vast majority of teachers are saying very, very positive things about the school, the climates that they work in. And I will show you numbers around this, but that is, I think, probably the most important thing and you should keep in mind. 2, we have talked for the last few years about the trend in teacher evaluation. So back in 2012, when the statewide teacher evaluation system rolled out, teachers were not hugely positive about whether or not the system was actually providing guidance for them or information for them. That has shifted steadily over the past few years, and we see a continuation of that trend to the point where the vast majority of teachers, now 70%, are saying that evaluation improves their teaching and their students' learning. And teachers report that they are taking evaluation feedback seriously. And we'll dig into that as well, but I think if you are thinking about this as a system for improving what's going on in our classrooms, there's probably nothing more important than that third point. Areas for improvement. This first one. I'll explain this one a little more too, but we tend to see administrators answering slightly more positively than teachers about every climate measure that we ask about. The disparities aren't huge, but that's, I think, probably to be expected and not a cause for concern. The biggest disparity we see is when you ask about school discipline policies. When you ask administrators and teachers whether or not they think school discipline is enforced fairly and effectively. And so we will think about that, what that means. I know that many of you have probably seen civil rights reports on school discipline measures, and so I think that's worth calling out, and we'll talk about that. While teachers are acting on feedback from the evaluation system, not all of them believe they're getting feedback from the evaluation system. 4 in 10 teachers report that they aren't actually receiving useful feedback from teacher evaluation. Equally importantly, if they want to actually take the feedback they're getting and improve, educators don't believe they've adequate time or resources for collaboration. And finally, TN Ready. I will show you a few questions about TN Ready at the end of this, and we can talk through what that tells us and what it doesn't tell us. So school climate. What you have years here, 2014, 2015, and 2016. Last year I got up in front of you and reported that answers to school climate questions like the staff at this school like being here, I would describe us as a satisfied group, and I feel appreciated for the job I'm doing. We saw a big jump last year in whether or not teachers felt good about their school climate. This year, we've basically seen things stay at about the same level. Almost 80% of teachers say they feel good about the climate they're working in. There are a lot of graphs here. Stop me if you have things you want to dig into about the substance. These questions here are about the protection of instructional time. And this feels very different than what we hear anecdotally. So I want to dwell on this for 1 second. Teachers in my school are allowed to focus on educating students with minimal interruptions. School leaders in my school protect instructional time. I think when that is not the case, we hear about it a lot, right? There's always the concern that teachers aren't actually able to focus on teaching because of all the other noise around them. Right now we have 8 out of 10 teachers saying we are allowed to focus on educating students with minimal instruction. Almost 9 out of 10 teachers saying school leaders in my school protect instructional time. I think that's hugely important. And now let's talk discipline. So these are not year to year. Now we're looking at teachers and administrators on a variety of questions about school discipline. Does the school use a consistent approach with all students when addressing disciplinary issues of a similar nature? 96% of administrators say yes. 68% of teachers say yes. Does the school effectively handle school discipline and behavioral problems? Again, almost 100% of administrators say yes, and about 70% of teachers say yes. The reason that matters, you all have seen this before, but here's just one slide on what discipline actually looks like in Tennessee. This is the one place where you really do miss the headline here. So between 6th and 9th grade, these are percentages of a particular student group who have been either received a suspension or expulsion. So between 6th and 9th grade, about 20% of our Asian students have received a suspension or expulsion. 2/3 of our African American students have received a suspension or expulsion. About 43% of our Hispanic students and about 32% of our white students. we've looked at this in a variety of ways, trying to understand how we can make sense of just these sort of fairly large student group disparities that you see. We can talk about that more, but again, I think that to some extent when we see on the perceptions piece, teachers are seeing this and administrators right now don't seem to. And I think as we move forward, this is one of the big stories that we are calling out as we're pushing this data out to our school and district leaders. How can school and district leaders be more aware of the places where disciplinary procedures in the school right now aren't successful?
Well, this disparity is pretty alarming, but if you ask me if 19% of Tennesseans were expelled, I would say no way. As a whole.
So this is suspensions and expulsions. Just to suspension. This includes.
Well, it doesn't matter. I'm still thinking that if you have 20% of Tennesseans either being, and that's just one cohort.
One cohort,
but that's
several years. Correct.
But so, I mean, dang, that's a lot of. We got a whole lot of suspensions, expulsions going on.
Absolutely.
Give us a little more context. This is extraordinary.
Yeah.
A graph that this amount of ninth graders ninth graders.
So this is six, again, I apologize.
7, 8, 9.
This is over several years, between 6th and 9th grade. So 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade.
During that 3-year period, higher percentage of these populations.
Absolutely stunning. Yeah. Not,
Is this self-reported data by the districts? How do we access this information?
this is data that districts collect and gets automatically reported out to the state. Our highest, the year of highest discipline in Tennessee, the year where we give out the most disciplinary referrals is 9th grade. And I'm trying to remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I'm afraid I'm going to get these wrong, but I think it's something like a quarter of 9th graders receive some sort of disciplinary referral. Don't hold me to that.
Could you define for the group suspension and expulsion as well? Just define them.
Sure. So this means basically being removed from your teacher of record. It can mean an in-school suspension, so being taken somewhere in the school and you spend at least a whole day there. It can mean out-of-school suspension. It can mean an expulsion, which an expulsion is actually defined in an interesting way too. So an expulsion is, I believe, more than 10 days out of school. I need to confirm that, but is that correct? Yeah, an expulsion is or remanding to an alternative school. The last statistic, as we think about subgroups that I have given before, is that in 9th grade, African American students represent a quarter of the Tennessee population in 9th grade, but they represent 80% of the statewide expulsions.
Has there been any, I don't know the right term, but comparison where you've looked at these numbers and where the suspensions and expulsions are coming from and the teacher level or the school's evaluation data? I mean, I'm wondering if you have situations where teachers who aren't equipped to handle discipline in an effective way are skewing some of this. And a lot of times you hear, and I don't have the data, you would, that in some of our higher poverty or higher minority schools, you have teachers that are of lower abilities in that. I'm just wondering if that is it's not an excuse,
right,
it's still bad, but I'm just wondering if there's some connection there.
It's a good question. We have not tied this to evaluation data, and we've not tied this to the teacher level. We have looked at the school level, and there are some schools that end up that have much higher discipline rates than the average in our state. And there are some districts that do, and that is some work that the department has taken on pretty seriously. We've also seen some really exciting models emerging from some districts of ways to deal with disciplinary issues that don't look like this.
Do we look like Georgia? Do we look like Kentucky? How does this-
That I actually don't know. It's a good question.
There,
Probably
let's
not.
reference the report. Yeah, go ahead and reference
This
the
this
national
actually
report.
just came up yesterday.
Yesterday.
We were similarly talking about this at the Assessment and Practices Task Force, and we were talking about a school quality and success indicator. There was a report that was written by Edward Smith and Sean Harper from University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education that looked at school suspension and expulsion on Black students in southern states, so states from West Virginia to Texas. And Tennessee was number 1 in terms of suspensions for Black students.
Suspensions, expulsion.
This one says, yes, suspension and expulsion, yes.
And again,
So
for black
this was
students,
For
a,
black
this was a
students.
topic in our assessment task force yesterday, and so just a precursor, we're talking about, would this be something that you would want to report pretty transparently, more so than we are at the school and district level, and potentially have it as part of a metric and accountability, and bring more attention and conversation to it. And so we were really digging into this very topic yesterday and are looking to make some recommendations in this area.
So are these numbers growing or are they declining?
they have been relatively constant. They've actually declined very, very slightly. We have much more in-depth information just on disciplinary practices in Tennessee and how it's looked over time, and again, digging into what's happening where, that we would be happy to bring before this group. If that makes sense.
Give us a little picture of how this relates to persistence, graduation. We have some
Sure.
studies there that give us a little picture.
So we have looked at this somewhat just in relation to the loss of instructional time, right? Again, you're taking a teacher away from their, you're taking a student away from their teacher and putting them somewhere else. And so we absolutely see a whole bunch of trends where over time these students are losing ground.
Okay.
Teacher evaluation, and that took a while, so I'll go fairly quickly, but again, stop me if you have questions. These graphs are overtime line graphs that show how teachers are feeling about whether or not evaluation improves. Again, I wish you had headlines here. Whether or not evaluation improves their teaching practice or their students' learning. The gray line is teaching practice, the orange line is students' learning, and as you can see, kind of a very, very positive story for the state about whether or not evaluation is actually making a difference according to our teachers.
And it's a very positive result, I think.
And it keeps increasing. I think this speaks to the work that the districts are doing, trying to turn this into something that feels useful to people. So what this actually asks is, this breaks down the different evaluation components. So remember the way teacher evaluation works. There is an observation component, there's a student growth component, and sometimes there are other, so there's an achievement component. But then there's also a portfolio component for teachers in certain grades and subjects who aren't receiving a TVAS score. And so we asked about all those components. First we asked teachers, did you receive this particular component of evaluation? Once they explained whether or not they received it, we asked, is it appropriate for use in your teacher evaluation? And do you understand what you're being evaluated on? And I just want to show you trends here because I think this is interesting. Observation. So practically everyone feels observation is an appropriate means for evaluating the performance, and everyone understands it. The next graph, this is portfolio. So portfolio, as you know, is something that has been a big topic of discussion for the state board and is expanding in useful ways across the state. And portfolio is the next highest rating in terms of whether or not people feel it's appropriate, whether or not they understand what it's evaluating them on. There were also questions we asked about the kinds of feedback they were getting. And again, teachers are really appreciating the feedback they're getting from portfolios, which I think matters a lot for the kinds of policies you have made over the past few years. Next up is individual TVAS, and the final one is school level TVAS. So as you can see, people are less trusting and less understanding of school level TVAS than we have been. do people feel like they have the correct resources to be able to deal with evaluation? This is one of the few decreases that we've seen where people were less positive this year than they were last year. So while teachers feel that evaluation is more likely to improve their teaching, they actually feel like they're being provided with less time, materials, access to staff, and leadership support to make evaluation possible, to deal with all the nuts and bolts of the way this works. And similarly, this is a sort of funny set of graphs here, but we asked them how much of a burden is teacher evaluation on you? And 52% of teachers said the teacher evaluation process was highly burdensome. In 2015, that went up to 58 in 2016. So I think one of the things that we're thinking about is, as we continue to push the feedback aspects of evaluation, how do we make this something that actually doesn't feel like it's taking too much time, feeling like there's so much associated with it that people can't actually teach. Any questions? Professional learning. This is quick, but again, interesting. So here's another administrator-teacher disparity. About 60% of teachers that say, I received feedback as a result of my evaluation system. About 93% of administrators say, yep, my teacher received feedback as a result of the evaluation system. It's something to consider, again, something we're calling out for school and district leaders. Most of our teachers who say they received feedback say they are taking some action as a result of that feedback. Feels positive. And if you look by evaluation level, our level 2 teachers, our level 3 teachers, our level 4 teachers, and our level 5 teachers, the ones who take the most action as a result of feedback are the lowest rated teachers. Which again, I'm putting up in front of you not because it is surprising necessarily, but it suggests that things are going in the right direction. One last cause for concern here. We ask teachers, do you feel like you have adequate time for collaboration with other teachers? Do you feel like you have adequate paid time for collaboration with other teachers? Do you feel like you have adequate resources and materials available during collaboration? Do you feel like you have adequate staff expertise available during collaboration, again, in order to focus on your own improvement? And basically we see 3 out of 10 or fewer teachers are saying, yes, these things are adequate. Paul's team is thinking a lot about this, and we are tracking this metric over time. We hope we will see some big improvements. Finally, TN Ready. Again, things that happen during this testing window are, number one, the online testing system crashed, and then number 2, we terminated our contract. Actually, the slide that says this. We terminated our contract with Measurement Inc. So that's the context, and it's been a little bit hard for us to figure out how to make sense of TN Ready questions given those things. The basic story here is teachers were not at all positive on TN Ready. Right? So actually, a whole bunch of teachers said, my instructional practices align to TN Ready expectations, and my curriculum aligns to TN Ready expectations. So we have a lot of teachers who felt like they were ready going into the test, but they didn't feel like the test was ready, and they didn't particularly love the practice tools. Hard to know whether that was clouded by their experiences with the test itself, but less than 20% said they thought TN Ready practice tools were adequate, and less than 40% said the TN Ready blueprints met their needs. So now we're actually talking about things pre-test, and this is some work that Nikki's team has taken on, trying to shift these numbers over the next year. Questions?
Okay, questions? I think some great data here. Certainly the suspensions, expulsions is an island. I had no idea. I guess the others. We have that much going on. I am delighted by the results you get. Teachers saying that evaluation actually is improving results. I think that's phenomenal. Given I don't think that always is the natural answer that you get from teachers. I guess I am concerned about the percentage there that don't get feedback. We talked about that's a problem we need to work on to the extent we can some way.
Just following from that, Nate, I think it was really interesting to see the breakdown of their feelings about the various elements in the evaluation system. And again, just interested to know more on the portfolio measures. As we look into the next school year, what are we seeing in terms of sign-up rates? And do you have any updates on sort of how many districts will be participating in some of those portfolio optional models?
Does anyone who knows those better than I do want to do this?
Yeah, I think even tomorrow we bring that up,
Okay.
the number of districts that are now taking up, because it's a significant increase for next year based on our evaluation flexibility survey. And I think that's exciting to see. And I think as the point was made, is the feedback that's often in these portfolio models that teachers are really responding to about changing their practice, and they're actually getting really concentrated feedback in the portfolio model.
I should add that we have been, our team is actually pulling together a short several-page report on the data and evidence that we've collected from the past years of portfolio. And so we've seen some really positive things, both around teachers who go through the portfolio process, and we see meaningful increases in observations of their instructional practice and their ratings, and then also, again, these survey results.
So, I don't know that I've ever thought of it. Are some evaluations just verbal?
Yeah.
So why, when you got the administrator saying, yeah, we're leading back, and the teacher saying, I'm not, it seems like it's a fairly simple way to go audit and see what does the file have feedback.
So this was a topic of discussion, and this is what I mean that this is a first look here. So in some ways, every evaluation by its very nature is feedback, right? You receive a score, you receive at the very least an area of reinforcement, an area of refinement. So for someone to say, no, I didn't receive feedback, we actually aren't entirely sure what they mean, because they are receiving something. The teachers in the system are receiving something, but they're not receiving something that is memorable, meaningful, whatever it is. And so we're digging into this piece and trying to figure out what is the audit that we would look at for to make sense of what real feedback is versus just entering the stuff.
Knowing that could help to policy modify what those evaluations need to contain. It was always supposed to help teachers get better.
Right.
I wonder, could it be the post-conference? That people are not having the in-person post-conference. To your point, you can see the written feedback, but the post-conference part is that I think, for me, I feel like I get feedback when we sit down and we dialogue.
I even
about
think though there ought to be some sort of report on that. Some memo of understanding, some memo of that conversation.
And it's in policy within a week of the observation that that's a requirement for that post-conference. I think he is mentioning sometimes there's the quality issue of a principal giving feedback in the post-conference and a teacher saying, okay, I understand what you're saying, but it's not necessarily helping me get better, the perception of that.
Yeah.
And then I think there are times when, unfortunately, a principal puts the scores in and they don't have the post-conference. So I think there's both sometimes happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let us get back to you as we continue to try to make sense of the data and the people who are saying they didn't receive feedback, because I think it's the right question.
Okay, very good. Other questions? Okay, hey, thank you. Good report. Good information. The standards review. Laura?
All right, so the PowerPoint's getting changed out. You probably noticed that you have quite a few different sets of standards before you on first reading tomorrow, and so we thought it would be helpful to do a brief presentation to cover those 4 different sets of standards. So we're going to tag team this a little bit with the different individuals who've been primarily responsible for working on those sets of standards coming up before you. So we'll start out with science, and I will do the majority of the presenting with science, along with bringing up Jeannie Cuervo, who is the vice chair of our Science Standards Recommendation Committee here in a minute. And then I'll turn it over to Lee Cummins on our staff, who's going to talk about fine arts. And then Lori and Mark will come up for health. And then finally, to close us out, Danielle and Casey will talk about the changes to the counseling standards. So the science standards review process has actually functioned much like the social studies and its process is going to function, and the math and English language arts process did. And that really occurs in kind of 4 key phases of collecting public feedback, bringing it to an educator advisory team, putting their work back online for an additional period of public feedback, and then ultimately working with our standards recommendation committee. But one interesting thing to note about science, and I'll go back just a
second on this slide to talk about it, is the science review process actually began before the legislation that outlined that 4-phase process began in 2015. So our review of science standards has actually been occurring since back in 2014. So we are, our science educators and our standards recommendation committee members are really excited that this draft is finally before you tomorrow for first reading. So we had originally, as a state board staff, convened a science steering committee in late 2013. They decided that yes, in fact, we did need to move forward with new science standards and convened an initial team to write those new standards that worked throughout all of 2014. And so what we did is when new legislation passed last year, we really decided, well, rather than posting our current standards on a website, there's already been all this great work done to write new science standards. We should move forward with that draft. So that is the draft that we initially posted online for public feedback last fall, was the new draft that had been written in 2014. So last fall, September through December, we had those new science standards up for public feedback. We then started working with our educator advisory team in early 2016. They reviewed all of the public feedback, made another round of revisions and changes to those standards. Then we posted them online starting in April throughout May to receive additional public feedback. Lee and I traveled around the state to gather more feedback via via roundtables. We also did a higher education review with faculty from our university systems here in Tennessee. The Southern Regional Education Board, SREB, also provided another external review of the science standards during that April to May period. And then we worked with our standards recommendation committee throughout this entire spring. I've not worked with a committee that took their charge more seriously. They poured hours and hours and hours into their work, reviewed the standards in great detail, broke out in lots of different committees, and Jeannie will share a little bit more with you about what their work looks like in just a second. But they ultimately approved the set of standards that are coming before you tomorrow. They approved those in early July. A couple of highlights just in terms of the changes that you'll see in these new science standards. So one thing to note is that these new science standards are based on the K-12 framework for science education. That is the same framework that our 2009 standards are based on as well. It's a research framework. It provides research about what is developmentally appropriate for students at different age levels, and it becomes a helpful tool for thinking about how do we actually organize the content and the specific standards that we write for our state. The way that they're organized, I'll talk about each of these concepts in just a second, but they're organized around a set of core ideas, disciplinary core ideas, and embedded within them are focused on several cross-cutting concepts, and you'll see a real infusion of science and engineering practices. That's one of the most exciting things about these standards, that they're very practice-based. And so all of that new structure and these new standards are really going to result in what we think are going to be 3 key shifts for science teachers and for our students throughout the state. So there's going to be a real focus on scientific literacy. What does it mean to read and write like a scientist? How do you take information in and then ultimately report it back? There's a real increased focus on conceptual understanding. So I think currently in our science standards, there's a lot of focus on memorization of facts, and we're really moving beyond that with these new standards. We're focusing on how do students make sense of a scientific concept and then apply that to other areas. And then finally, I mentioned the science and engineering practices, and this really gets to that last shift, which is the action of science. We want our students and our teachers to be doing science with these new standards. We want them to be acting as if they are a scientist in implementing these new standards. So on this slide, there are a few of the disciplinary core ideas. So in our math standards, we refer to this kind of organization as domains. They're referred to as cornerstone standards in English language arts, and this is really just a conceptual framework for how the standards are organized. So every standard from kindergarten through chemistry 2, or whatever high school elective you would like to take in science, is coded with one of these disciplinary core ideas and one of the component ideas. I think the nice thing about that is that it allows our educators to really see how these concepts build over time. So one of the things you'll notice in the standards document is a helpful visual that shows, for example, Earth and Space Sciences component ESS 3. That appears in 1st grade, it then builds in 4th grade, it then builds into high school biology, and then into geology as an elective. So they can see how these concepts help to build over time. the cross-cutting concepts, these really, I think, help get at that conceptual understanding. So there are things like energy and matter. Well, that's a concept in science that we know starts out in kindergarten. It's going to move into students making sense of the water cycle, perhaps in late elementary or early middle school. And it's going to move into their course into high school physics, this cross-cutting concept of energy and matter. So these things, I think, are really going to help get at that conceptual piece and building student understanding and allowing teachers to really go deep into several key concepts. And then finally, the science and engineering practices. So this is really an example of the work that scientists do. They're going to obtain, evaluate, and communicate information. They're going to analyze and interpret data. And so these practices are embedded in the standards at all grade levels. That really help to get to that point I made earlier in that shift of helping students be engaged in the art of doing science. Any questions before I turn things over in terms of the content of the standards before I turn things over to Jeannie to talk about our recommendations committee? So as I mentioned before, we had a great standards recommendation committee who worked really diligently from March through July of this year to review all of the standards. And so I'll let Jeannie come up and just talk a little bit about their work.
Hello, I'm really excited to be here today on behalf of the Science Standards Recommendation Committee. We're very excited to present these standards to you. We would like to thank a few people, particularly Andre Allen and Andy Hebert, who have been the leads for the Science Standards Writing Team since 2014, and the advisory team, and we appreciate their expertise and their hard work and their commitment to this process. We'd also really like to thank Laura. She's done an exceptional job making sure that we have the resources and materials we need, effectively communicating with us, and just really helping make our job a lot easier. So we appreciate that. We're really excited about these standards. We are recommending these standards be implemented in the state of Tennessee. Particularly, we're excited because these standards were written by Tennessee educators for Tennessee students. They are solidly based in the most recent and the best research in science education. And we have received feedback from stakeholders across the state of Tennessee. We're particularly grateful for the feedback that we have received because we feel that the revisions that we have made based on that feedback have made these standards even stronger. So really all of the members of the recommendation committee as well as our lead writers feel that. So I would like to thank everyone in the state who took the time to give this feedback because it's really, really important to us. So we are looking forward to these standards being implemented in Tennessee classrooms, and as a high school teacher, I'm really looking forward to being able to implement them in my classroom as well. We did create a position statement, and you can see the main parts of our position statement here, so I just wanted to make a few comments about that. First of all, we believe in empowering educators, so we want to make it clear that these are standards, they're not curriculum. We know that curriculum will be developed at the system level, at the school level, and ultimately we want teachers to be able to use their expertise and their creativity to create learning opportunities for their own students, because we know that that way those learning opportunities will be unique and will be individual to their specific students. We do want to recommend support for teachers, so we do recommend that they receive professional development to help them implement these standards. We particularly like the train-the-trainer model, and we hope that the Department of Education will be able to facilitate this in conjunction with partnerships with higher education and with professional organizations like the Tennessee Science Teachers Association. We also particularly want to support elementary teachers. We want to recommend that elementary teachers have the time during the school day to focus on science. What we've done with these standards is really look closely at vertical articulation. So it's going to be really critical that at every grade level K-12, the standards are implemented for that particular grade level. So we want to make sure that teachers have the support they need to do that. Supplemental resources. We know that teachers are going to need additional resources, and in fact a support document is being worked on at this time to go along with the standards. It's not yet completed, of course. But Andre Allen, Andy Adair, and Kelly Chastain with the Department of Education, we know have been working on that. And we have seen part of it, and we're really excited about that document. And we want teachers to have access to the document, as well as other stakeholders, parents and students. We also want it to be dynamic. We want resources for teachers easily accessible on a website, and also the teacher input for that process. We also know that teachers need materials and resources. We know that schools across the state have formed partnerships with agencies, and we want that to continue and strengthen. We feel like partnerships with higher education, business and industry, the Tennessee STEM Innovation Network, as well as informal science centers can be very helpful for our schools, our K-12 schools. And finally, we wanted to address assessment. The way these standards are written is according to grade band. And our ultimate goal is that when students graduate from 12th grade, they're going to be prepared to pursue whatever their goals are for their life, whether that be going into the workforce, receiving additional training, going to community college, university, military. So we feel that assessment should focus on helping them achieve that. So we particularly want to help students be successful in college entrance exams, for example, military entrance exams. And we feel that any assessment that is created based on the standards should be transparent, first and foremost. So we would like to see that representative questions, samples are made available to teachers, students, parents ahead of time so that they can be prepared. We also feel that the first year of implementation of the standards, that the assessment data should be used to inform, and it should not impact teacher evaluation or student grades. So we're excited about this. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys think about it and to moving forward with these standards. So thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Great, great.
Any questions we can answer on science standards before we move to the next topic?
I'm just curious to know if Tiffany has any thoughts, because she's a potential future science student at the college level and engaged in that high school level.
I feel like you all are right on the action in science, because I feel like too much of it is focused on the facts of it, like you need to memorize this, rather than, okay, it's science, you have to apply what you've learned and think about different situations. And I think that's a really good perspective to put into your standards.
Okay, other questions? Jeannie, certainly thank you for, we know that this is a lot of work, and we certainly appreciate your involvement of all the members of the committee and all the teachers involved in this. I think this is a fantastic process. You know, we've been, Mike and others have been struggling with how we will get science standards approved for many years now, and I think we're on the way to getting something you can really be proud of.
And I think they were really strong when they were created initially in 2014, and I think the process we've moved forward with since then, as Jeannie mentioned, has only strengthened them. So while these are a long time coming, I think the extra time has paid off in terms of quality as well.
Great, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, I'll turn it over to Lee to talk about the work that she's been leading on finance.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon, the board. I want to start out by really thanking Drew Davison, who was the chair of our Fine Arts Committee. Drew couldn't be with us today, so I'm going to be presenting on his behalf. But Drew and the committee were such a passionate, hardworking group of educators who put so much work into revising these standards. This process has been a long time in the making. We started last winter, and it's been great because we were able to also have a competitive selection of our committee members, and due to the different divisions in fine arts, we had over 30 folks that we ended up selecting, and that was composed of both K-12 educators as well as higher education faculty members. And so we really tried to get a diversity not only across the state, but also of the different types of educators. And so process-wise, as I said, we started in the winter, and one of the first things that we did was we actually put out a pre-survey online that was available on the State Board website. And what that survey really sought to find out was, what do arts educators currently really like about the standards? What do they want to see improve?
What do they want to see gone from the standards? That sort of thing. So getting that feedback really helped the committee frame their work on the front end, knowing what educators wanted to come out of this process. And so the committee first met in February, and at that meeting, they made a lot of the revisions to the standards. They sought public feedback again, and that was on the draft standards. There was a survey that we posted on our website in May and June. And that was all of the draft standards, and then we invited educators, community members, whoever to provide feedback on those drafts. And then using that data and feedback, the committee went back and made a few more revisions to the standards to produce the draft that we have for you today. The fine arts standards are 20 different standard sets. So as you might imagine, this was a really large undertaking. It took the full committee of 31 folks to do this. We had 10 music writers, we had 6 writers for visual and media arts, another 6 writers for theater and dance, and then 8 other reviewers, in addition to Drew, our leader. And so it was important that we had all of these folks because they really needed to cover a broad set of standards. This is very specific knowledge. And so because of that, we pulled teachers that really know that divisional part. And then also within the standard sets, as you might see, we had a different set of standards for K through 5 dance, 6 through 8 dance, and then 9 through 12 dance. And so it's something where there are different sets of standards for each grade band to allow there to be scaffolding and progression just within K through 5, et cetera. And so music is a little bit different because there are different courses within music. And so in addition to just general music, which we had for K through 12, there's also vocal music, instrumental music, and then music theory, which is an elective for high school. And so what do the standards look like now? So structurally, the standard's highest level is the domains. And then below the domains, we have different foundations, which I'll touch on in a minute. And then finally, the smallest unit within the standards is the standards themselves. And so across all of the divisions, there are 4 overarching domains. And they are common for all of the different fine arts subjects, whether it be music, theater, media arts, etc. And so for the P, I guess, the P within the code, that differs depending on the division. And so for music, dance, and theater, that is perform, whereas for visual arts, it's present, and then for media arts, it's produce. And that's really significant because you don't necessarily perform within media arts, or you don't necessarily present in music. And so for the rest of them, though, create, respond, and connect, those are exactly the same throughout. And so the foundations that fall under all of those domains, there are 11 of them, and these are also common throughout all of the different divisions of arts. The standards, of course, underneath each are very different, but the foundations themselves at the higher level would be the same. And so under the perform, present, and produce section domains, that really focuses most on like the techniques, demonstrating and expressing work. And so for different divisions, it might be concerts or plays. Different types of shows is what that mostly would be manifesting as. And then for create, that's really developing work artistically. For respond, that's really about analysis, evaluation, interpretation of work. And so some of what you might see in those standards would be creating rubrics or providing and understanding feedback. And then finally for connect, that's really mostly about contextualizing and relating work to other things outside of just that course. And so a lot of that might look like relating things to different cultures or other forms of art. And so under each of these foundations in a given course or set of standards, there's anywhere from 1 to 5 or 6 standards under all of the foundations. And so the committee considered a couple of other things in doing this work and revising the standards. And these are really important and things that were on the top of their minds. And so literacy, I know as Laura talked about scientific literacy, they really considered artistic literacy. And so that included visual thinking and notation literacy. It's not just the literacy as we might know it. And so they also considered the major work of the grade. So for the different divisions of art, the major work was not necessarily the same. For some of them, they might have focused more on create, while for others, it was more about performing. And so that was not necessarily the same, and they didn't want to force it to be the same. They wanted it to be more natural within each of the different types of art. And then finally, they looked at the opportunity to learn standards. So this was really the framework that they used for these standards. They specifically focused on some of the domains that were listed within the opportunity to learn standards, and then applied that to their revisions. But they also rewrote them from scratch using some of what was in the fine arts standards before. The committee did such a great job with so many standards in the different divisions of fine arts. They're really, like I said, a very passionate group of educators. And they, along with me, are really excited to see these be implemented and see the changes that are to come. Any questions?
Just note real quickly that this was the same group that really led us to the portfolio model on teacher evaluation that we were talking about earlier. This same group and led by the same educator, Drew Davison out of Memphis. I mean, we have a lot. We owe them a lot, I think, over the years recently in terms of the work that they've done. So it's great to see the standards working out too.
Yeah, I really can't commend Drew enough for the work that he did on this. I don't know if I said that he's the fine arts advisor for Shelby County Schools, but he's a very, very busy man, and he really committed a lot to this process.
I'm gonna get myself in a whole lot of trouble.
Are you our fine arts man?
I think more so, obviously, more so than I normally do whenever I open my mouth.
Please don't give me a hard time.
When I look at the teachers who are responsible for curriculum to match this very specific these standards. And then I think these same teachers are also getting evaluated for the overall performance of the school.
Not in this case. Like I said, these group of educators started the portfolio model.
So are they out of the?
Yes. They were the first, they actually led the way on that charge because they said that's not appropriate for us. We want to create our own model. They created the student portfolio sampling model that was just for fine arts, now it's for other educator groups too.
Well, see.
I'm still saying, you're not getting back in trouble.
Joel.
Yeah.
Better keep my mouth shut.
No, it's a great, I think that's why I wanted to make that point too, because I think this group of educators in particular really got out ahead with teacher evaluation to innovate, find a model that was going to capture the nuance of their work. And so even as you're going through, I mean, the respond, create, connect, I mean, that's all language that actually I think started with the teacher evaluation model that they developed. So it's kind of cool.
The librarians have portfolios?
Theirs is a little different because they see all students and they use usually the literacy school scores. So they're not under this model yet, no.
Okay, other questions, comments? Okay. Good job.
Thank you.
Good job, appreciate it.
Good afternoon. I'm Lori Paisley, Executive Director of the Office of Coordinated School Health, and I have Mark Bloodworth from our team who chaired this committee to revise the health education standards. And so I want to tell you a little bit about that. The standards have not been revised since 2009. So this past December, we got a committee together. That committee was made up of current K-12 health education and lifetime wellness teachers, coordinated school health coordinators, and higher education faculty. The committee presented the draft standards after they completed those edits to the regional meetings of coordinated school health. Just in case any of you don't know, Tennessee's the only state that has coordinated school help in every school system. So we have a full-time coordinator in every school system, and they lead this work. They may not be the health education teacher, but they oversee it and support it. So we have regional coordinated school health meetings quarterly every year, and we presented the draft of these standards at those regional meetings, asking the coordinators to take these this draft standards back to PE teachers, lifetime wellness teachers, health educators, health education teachers, and school counselors who sometimes teach health education. So we asked them to get us feedback. They did present that feedback, and that happened. We started in December with the committee, and the feedback happened between January and March. Once we had that feedback, we posted that to the State Board of Education website for public feedback, and that site was open for 3 months, and we received over 320 public comments on that. Final edits and revisions were made to the standards based on those comments. One thing before I get going on our slides, and we only have a few, is in the current standards, the standard is presented as a broad statement. So for example, one of the current standards would be the student will understand the relationship of nutrition to healthy living. In the revised standard, they're more specific to knowledge or behavior. So for example, the component might be personal and community wellness, and the subcomponent would be nutrition. And then the standard would be specific for the specific knowledge or behavior. So for example, describe a healthy meal using the basic food group. One of the main feedback pieces that we got were our current standards are much too wordy. And we took that in stride. Also, they felt like our current standards were very restrictive to what teachers could do. So we really focused throughout this committee process to give teachers the freedom to do what is best. And I think Jeannie talked a little bit about that too. We really feel like health and science standards correlate, so I was glad to hear her say that. But we wanted to open those standards up, give them a little bit more freedom to do what was best for their particular students. The standards are specific to each grade level or course. They're specific to certain knowledge or behaviors which will drive their quality instruction and assist those administrators in evaluating these health education and lifetime wellness teachers. Health education in K-5 and then 6-8 can be taught in various ways. It really depends on the school system, the capacity that they have, and each school. But as you all know, lifetime wellness is a required course. So we do have lifetime wellness teachers in our high schools teaching this subject, and we have many of them on our committee. The standards are divided into 3 grade bands. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that change in a minute, but it's K-5, 6, 8, and high school. So 9, 12, there's 5 components, and under each component is the subcomponent refining that more refined grouping. So really the process here, we had all interested participants apply, so we had an application process, and we went through those applications and selected our committee members. Some of the marketing and the recruiting that we did was through the Commissioner's Update for Directors that was sent out through the Department of Education. We do a monthly coordinated school health newsletter, which we included that in. We announced it and then had some feedback from the regional coordinated school health meetings, and then posted it, as I said earlier, on the State Board website. Again, we convened in December of 2015, and we had all grand divisions represented, East, Middle, and West. We had 18 members of the committee, and our higher ed faculty that was represented there was MTSU, ETSU, Lipscomb University, and UT Martin. I knew there was one more. So we were very well represented there. And then again, there were 3 different subcommittees, elementary, middle, and high school. And again, those health education teachers, we actually have, just so you know, 2 districts in the state that have full-time health educators. So that's all they do, is to do health education. And those counties are Loudoun and Warren. And Warren County's representative is actually going to be here tomorrow. She was a member of the elementary team. And just so you know, she was also a member of the committee that revised the standards back in 2009. So we're bringing her expertise tomorrow. Again, we had higher education, and some of those higher education faculty are the people that are teaching our future health educators. and then those coordinated school health coordinators. So part of the professional and public feedback, again, those standards were presented at the regional meetings. We asked them to get feedback from their districts and submit to us. That was through their PE, health, and some school counselors. And then we collected using a SurveyMonkey link that was shared through the Department of Education and the State Board website. And then feedback was reviewed by appropriate committees, and then input was given based on that review. Do you guys have any questions?
Questions?
My last slide here is really going through the differences between the current standards and our proposed standards. So our previous standards were grade banded, and now they're grade specific. The measures used to be performance indicators with different levels, and now we're really relying on teacher observations, again, to give them more freedom to do what's best for their students. The layout was domains, and now we have those components, subcomponents, and then specific to lifetime wellness in grades 9 through 12, we have a component extension, and that's just a further idea to take it to another level for students, for lifetime wellness teachers. And then a little bit of the language. Family life education, we changed the language here to human growth and development. And what that really does is expands what teachers can do with that, because you really tie yourself down with family life. And so by changing the language and changing that to human growth and development, we give teachers more of an opportunity to expand their teaching and their instruction. And that's it for health education.
Okay. Great. Any questions? Okay. Good job.
Thank you.
Do we have any, is that all the standard, Laura?
We have an update on the school counseling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Save the best for last. Wanted to briefly share with you just an update to the school counseling model and standards. These actually have not been updated since 2005, so we haven't beat. But we're really pleased with the work that has come about from the process itself. So back in 2016, literally about a year ago, the department recommitted itself to having a statewide coordinator for school counseling, recognizing the importance that this role plays across our state and continues to increase its presence. And so one of the first things out of the gate that we knew we had to address was actually revising the model of practice for school counselors, as well as the standards by which they would then implement that on a daily basis. So there are two slides, I believe they're in your deck, that really kind of hit to the process itself, and then the particulars. And then obviously within the notebook you have the actual model and the standards, so I won't belabor that. But during this process that we started, we have worked, and this was really starting back in the fall, but going into higher gear this spring, we really worked with over 1,200 individual stakeholders across the state to have the dialogue that was necessary with the frontline counselors from all grades, K-12, and asking very simple questions. What are you doing now? And how is it either congruent with what is being asked of you, or is it discongruent? In other words, are you being asked to do things that are out of alignment or misaligned with what should be asked of you, given the descriptors and the standards that are given? And so what we were able to do from that, both in terms of what's the reality and what is it that we would like to have, we began to kind of reframe that. So the model itself has been reframed, and again, as I mentioned, the standards. And so where you find yourselves right now is the first reading of that work to date. I will share, which is not on that, and I think there may be a question or two that might pop up if I don't share this, is that there are actually ratios within statute and within BEP. So school counselors, that funding comes actually from the BEP and then is accordingly distributed at the local level. Currently in the BEP formula for K-6, the ratio from counselor to students is 1 to 500. At the 7-12 level in BEP, it's actually 1 to 350. The actual averages within our state range from 1 to 266 students, which is a very small district that we have here in Tennessee, to 1 counselor
for 1,687 students. And that is also a district in our state, and clearly that is not something that we would want to promote. But needless to say, what is being asked of our school counselors is quite a bit. And so the work that we have done has been really to try and kind of hone in on the things that matter most. And we're really locked in on the 3 areas of practice that a school counselor receives, both in terms of their training and then when they are to enter into the district. And that are 3 domains: academic, social emotional learning, and then what we would call post-secondary career readiness or preparation. And those 3 areas are actually the responsibilities of our counselors, as it's stated, and you will see that again framed out within the work that you have in your notebooks. But by and large, probably the biggest change is that we moved in from a 2005 where we had very general standards, only 9 of which kind of laid out what would be the responsibilities of a school counselor. We wanted to provide greater specificity to that, and so those 9 standards are actually changed into 63 very specific standards, again within those 3 main domains that I just mentioned: academic, social emotional learning, and then post-secondary career readiness. And the expectation will be that through this work that we have, that through your approval, this would be more specific for the counselors to respond to react with, and also for districts to utilize as they too think through what are the better opportunities and responsibilities of a school counselor within a district. So that's it. I'm kind of trying to keep it a high level. I know that you have everything that you need to know, so I really didn't want to kind of belabor anything that you don't already have, but I'm very happy to take questions.
Oh, if it's that ratio, as you mentioned, 1 to 1,000 something, they don't have counsel.
No.
Right, so.
Yeah, and if I could just stir the pot a little bit.
Yeah,
why not? It's the end of the day. When we did actually have a lot of the time with our counselors across the state, obviously one of the first questions out of the gate was, what are you being asked to do now? Like, what is going on now on your daily basis that you are being brought in to do? And just a few to highlight, many counselors are actually assigned as the testing coordinators. So they are not necessarily there to support students, maybe in test anxiety, or helping teachers understand how to work with students in preparation for testing. They're actually the ones who actually coordinate the testing. They are also asked regularly to serve as the building data entry person for master and student scheduling. And they are also, in some cases, particularly at the elementary grade levels, asked to provide the academic interventions for RTI Square. That also is not in their wheelhouse in terms of what the preparatory was for them. So I do want to kind of highlight and also reinforce why we wanted to provide greater specificity in this newer version than what was really on the books right now, which is very broad generalizations that kind of leave it to the district to make those determinations. So,
Post-secondary and career counseling, 2 different things.
I don't believe they should be, but depending on how districts assume it or approach it, and also the workload of a counselor may weigh heavily more on one side than the other side. But the way in which we view it and the way in which these standards are presented, it is one and the same. That these are a combined effort. The counselor should be looking at the student's interests in terms of career interests and post-secondary engagement from those interests.
But I will add to that there are very few school counseling programs that prepare school counselors that actually do include coursework or specific competencies around this college and career advising or counseling. We looked at this a few years ago, and it's something like a couple dozen programs nationally even have depth in that area of a school counseling preparation program. And so this is an area that we've got to look at as a state. See, are we adequately preparing them for the role that we want them to move into?
That is correct.
Tomorrow when we talk about high school, whatever it is, it's got a pretty good segment in there about CTE. And I can tell you, I think Knox County has 1 career counselor. And Lillian will tell you that we are sitting there on top of literally tens of thousands of job openings that no one can communicate to these kids at a time when they could take it. It's a big gap. The other thing is too, and this may be part of the job description, but a lot of guidance counselors spend time starting around first of the year figuring out who's not in the queue to graduate and figuring out how to work
Build
it
a
out.
fire.
That's right. Which is sort of like a pathology report.
What are, with anything in these standards, though, go to force the LEAs to have greater staffing for this? That's part of it.
No, and I think that's you know, if you were to really kind of look at the elephant in the room, that really is part of the rub, is that it is a local level determination as to how you want to staff up this position, and how you want to utilize this position. You know, it is expected that a district would abide by these standards as they lay out in terms of employment responsibilities or role responsibilities. It's not necessarily the case, as we know. And the building up of even just meeting the ratio that is set in BEP is sometimes obviously not adhered to by the district. And just utilized otherwise.
Yeah. There's no really requirement that they staff at the BEP funding level.
It is the expectation, is not the requirement.
So what would be the solution to that?
Money.
Well, money, yeah.
Well, but
and being more directing what the district has to do.
I mean, right now they kind of function as generalists for whatever the administration kind of needs them to do.
And just for in case folks are not aware, there are actually several different other kind of providers or source sites that, to alleviate some of this disparity, where you have whether it's a private foundation, a statewide network. In some cases, I can speak just from my other hat, which is CTE, is that we use federal dollars in terms of purpose reserve to actually pay for career counselors to help support those individuals who are already in the district. Yeah, but these are like Band-Aids on a lifeboat. It's not necessarily the cure-all for probably, if you were to take this into a deeper philosophical discussion. What is being used right now to help support counselors in terms of ratios or reducing ratios or helping support? That's not necessarily the answer to this. I think you really would want to look more deeply about the culture of expectation of the local levels, and then how that then is supported in terms of the actual engagement of the counselor at that local level.
So my question, have we asked for input from the directors of schools? Do we know why they're not in reality able to have their counselors fulfill the expectations of why the positions were created? Because I know this subject matter has come up many times in the districts that I represent, and the directors always say they want their counselors to perform the duties that have been outlined for them. The reality is there's so many other things that are happening that, and you know those, and you've spelled out some of them, that they're not able to make that happen. And in the Upper Cumberland, we do have 6 of our school districts that do have the academic career coaches. That's a new position that was created 3 years ago, as you know, because of our Pathways to Prosperity work. But most school districts cannot fund that position. They don't have the money to do that. You know, in the standards, it's also mentioned about clerical support to the counselors. And if they had that clerical support, they could probably do the majority of what's expected of them in those ratios, the 80%, et cetera. But again, it gets back to funding. I'm curious, and the question is.
So I think that what was shared with you is by and large, the most often heard is that there is too much to do in the central office, not enough warm bodies to get it done. And so they will pick the individuals who they believe can handle those responsibilities. They recognize that it's not the role of that counselor to do it, but the alternative is that it doesn't get done. So I don't, I don't know what the answer is to that, except is that a local issue? Is that a budgetary issue at the local level? Is it you could pick any number of responses that you could probably provide. I will say also that within the BEP, there is set aside also for supplies to help cover costs to allow for a counselor to actually, conduct the programming that they are asked to do, and that is also not really provided. So, it's very complex, and I don't necessarily know that you can solve it in one fell swoop, but I think at some point it does have to be addressed, particularly as we place more and more emphasis on assisting our young people in better understanding what their opportunities are in this world. And you got to figure out, is that a traditional way? Is that a non-traditional way where you use a body of individuals? We have a lot of teachers who have very close relationships with their students who actually serve as better advisors to their future than a counselor ever could. And so do you look at these non-traditional ways, not necessarily going the hard and fast that's always been, but do you take these other routes that really actually could be more beneficial and in some ways build a stronger culture in those schools because you are strengthening those relationships in a more formal way that might be actually very timely for that student. So a variety of things to think about.
Okay. Continues to be lots of good opportunities out there, right? One of the things I think we can be really proud of, though, is the work that has been done on standards across curriculum, across all parts of the program. All the way from the math and English language arts to the science standards, the work they're doing on social studies, and the others that we talked about here. I think it's really some phenomenal work being done, and it's just a great process. I know at the national level, I keep on getting questions about the process that we've used, particularly on math, English language arts, and also science. And I think it's something we can really be proud of. Meeting scheduled for next year. Did we get to send out option for meeting schedules, or I don't think that went out to everybody?
Certainly with staff.
Okay. What I'm proposing, and get you all to maybe look at calendars overnight or something, and if you've got conflicts with these or got major problems with these, we'll maybe address them tomorrow. But meetings on January the 27th, April the 21st, July the 14th, and October the 20th. They are all Fridays. We would plan to, our normal process of meeting on Thursdays before that, and depending on what, we may have something Wednesday night or so forth, but basically workshop on Thursday, meeting on Friday. January the 27th, April the 21st, July the 14th, and October the 20th.
Do we know which of those would be out of Nashville and which would be in Nashville?
We don't at this point, but I guess the January meeting will probably be in Nashville for sure, and probably the October meeting in Nashville for sure. So the two in the middle there would be the ones that we would perhaps work on for external.
Mr. Chairman, just to let you know, Dr. DiPietro, the president of the University of Tennessee system, has invited us for October next year to come to the University of Tennessee Knoxville campus. So at that point,
correct what I just said.
Is there a football game now?
That's the question.
He's not winning this teacher prep program thing on. So it's 17th, October 2017.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say there's a football.
Okay. Okay, and if you would, check calendars and let us know if there's something, big conflict, some way we have some opportunity to move these around, even though we do need to meet on a quarterly basis, and, we've avoided Easter and a few other things that we need to do the program. Okay, at this point, we've invited Mr. Walter Butler, who is the president of Bethel, to meet with us and to talk about the recommendation here relative to Bethel. Is Amy going to start this?
I believe so.
Amy? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I'm with you, I'm going to sit up here, if that's okay.
Okay.
I've got lots of notes, and I want to make sure I share them accurately. Laura is handing out a timeline of events. There have been lots of events, and we want to make sure everybody has a timeline in front of them. So as Laura's getting finished, I'll go ahead and begin. First, let me provide some specific context for the department's recommendation and the role of the Tennessee State Board of Education and the Tennessee Department of Education in approving educator preparation providers and their programs. The Tennessee State Board of Education is required by Tennessee Code Annotated to adopt policies governing the qualifications, requirements, and standards of, and provide the licenses and certificates for all public school teachers, principals, assistant principals, supervisors, and directors of schools. The Tennessee Educator Preparation Policy sets forth expectations related to the approval of educator preparation providers and their associated programs, and also charges the Tennessee Department of Education with implementing the approval process. Approval of EPPs is critically important because the state relies on the recommendation of approved EPPs as a significant required component in an individual's application for a license to teach or lead in Tennessee schools. The recommendation serves as confirmation from the approved EPP that the applicant has the knowledge and skills necessary to serve as an effective educator in Tennessee schools. The approval process seeks to ensure that the EPP is equipped to make this recommendation. I'm going to walk through some lengthy comments. I'll be happy to take your questions at the end, or if you enter. Since 1989, the board has used the standards set forth by a national accrediting agency as the foundation of reviews, but has allowed individual EPPs to determine whether to seek national accreditation or complete a review process managed by the department. The composition of the review team, formerly called a board of examiners, varies, but all reviewers are volunteers. Volunteers are selected through an application process that considers qualifications and experience. Selected reviewers must complete training. The size of the review teams can vary slightly depending on the type of review, full or focused, or the number of specialty area programs being reviewed. Full reviews generally have a minimum of at least 4 reviewers. For reviews conducted by the National Accrediting Agency, formerly NCATE, now CAPE, several review team members are nationally trained reviewers from states other than Tennessee. These reviewers are selected by the National Accrediting Agency. In addition, national accreditation review teams also include some Tennessee-based reviewers. These reviewers tend to focus on reviewing the specialty area programs, but are sometimes assigned to review evidence related to the NCATE or CAPE standards. For reviews managed by the department, all reviewers are Tennessee-based. For EPPs that have been granted continuing approval by the board, on-site reviews, now called comprehensive reviews, managed by the department take place once every 7 years. The process begins with an off-site review of evidence. The EPP has an opportunity to present additional evidence during the on-site review. One difference between the state-managed process and the national process is that during the national accreditation process, the review team also provides an off-site report that is made available to both the EPP under review and the department prior to the on-site visit. This report alerts the EPP under review to concerns raised by the review team. On-site visits generally last for 3 to 4 days. The review team considers new evidence, deliberates, and generates decisions related to each standard at both the initial and advanced levels. Initial levels are programs that lead to a first license, while advanced levels are programs that lead to an advanced license, such as the instructional leader license. At the end of the site visit, the chair of the review team provides a brief verbal report during an exit interview to the leadership of the EPP that would generally include a president or provost, in addition to the head of the EPP, such as a dean or a director. At this meeting, the preliminary findings are shared with the EPP leadership. For instance, if an EPP is likely going to be reported as having not met a standard, this information would be conveyed during this meeting. Following the on-site visit, a final report is prepared. This report clearly outlines the findings of the review team. For reviews facilitated by the National Accrediting Agency, the report is reviewed by a council, which determines whether or not the EPP will be issued accreditation. For reviews facilitated or managed by the state, a state-convened group, the Commissioner's Advisory Committee for Unit and Program Approval, CACUPA, reviews the decisions made by the review team. The recommendation being brought to you tomorrow is the culmination of a series of visits that have taken place since 2013. The final visit, facilitated by the National Accrediting Agency, took place in November 2015. This visit was among the last of what Kate calls the legacy visits. Providers that started the national accreditation process under the old standards were allowed to complete the process by the fall of 2015. Moving forward, all providers seeking national accreditation will be assessed against CAPE standards. In addition, moving forward, any provider seeking initial accreditation must meet all CAPE standards to become accredited. Before I begin discussing the specifics of today's recommendations regarding Bethel University, I would like to note that this type of recommendation is not unprecedented. In 2013, the department recommended denial of approval of the EPP located at Lane College. In a situation similar to this one, Lane College did not meet 2 standards during the initial on-site review in November 2008. That review triggered a focused review that found the EPP had met standards but still had major stipulations. Those major stipulations triggered a second focused review, which resulted in a recommendation to deny approval of the EPP, and in that report there were 2 standards not met. The board approved that recommendation in 2013. Now I'd like to provide a detailed overview of the review process which has led to the current recommendation regarding the EPP at Bethel University. On April 2nd, 2012, Bethel University requested to delay their regularly scheduled state-managed review that was to take place in the fall of 2012. At that time, Bethel indicated an intention to seek national accreditation. The letter requesting the delays stated, and I quote, "In August 2011, all education programs at Bethel came under the umbrella of the newly formed College of Education. The past year has been one of discovery and change, discovering the processes of 3 different programs and changing all those processes into one cohesive system. Therefore, a visit in the fall would be a visit of programs past and processes that are no longer in place. In order to truly review Bethel's College of Education to see data supporting the new process, a delay would be most beneficial. This would allow the visiting team to see data from prior programs and a year's worth of data from the new processes and procedures established for the College of Education." End quote. On April 9th, 2012, the department approved the request for a delay of the on-site review and granted a 1-year deferral. On June 4th, 2013, Bethel University once again submitted a request to delay the review. In the letter requesting the review, the director of the School of Education stated, "There are several extenuating circumstances that have prompted this request. The primary reason for the postponement request is that Bethel University is currently undergoing a process of restructure that is impacting the School of Education. On June 12, 2013, the department denied that request. On September 3, 2013, Bethel University elected to revert from the planned national accreditation visit and requested to proceed with a state-managed review. The director of the School of Education cited significant organizational changes that included loss and intentional destruction of existing data. The letter also indicated that, and I quote, "Some data documents were plagiarized and others simply contained incorrect information. At the end of the 2012-13 school year, the administrator was reassigned to a position in another department. Recently, the administrator has been suspended due to the discovery of plagiarized documents published as NCATE/CAPE evidence," end quote. The letter went on to state, "The unit is ready for the Tennessee State Accreditation Team to visit because matrices are aligned with Tennessee standards, plans of study for each program have been updated, and data from student teaching, lesson planning, and micro-teaching has been disaggregated. However, we are not ready to go through the NCATE/CAPE process," end quote. With less than 2 months to prepare, the department convened a full review team and conducted the state-managed on-site review. On November 10 through 13, 2013, the department facilitated a state-only visit. The visit resulted in a report that indicated Bethel did not meet Standard 2, Assessment System and Unit Evaluation, or Standard 5, Faculty Qualifications, Performance, and Development. Bethel University issued a rejoinder that stated, after receiving the Tennessee Board of Examiners report on January 10, 2014, we have read and analyzed the information shared in the document. As we work to enhance and enrich our strengths while abating our weaknesses, we concur with the findings of the report. The Commissioner's Advisory Review took place on June 17th. As a note, on June 17th, 2014, as a note, in October 2014, the board passed the new educator preparation policy. That policy provided a timeline for implementation that identified the standards that should be used to assess programs moving forward. The timeline did allow for existing programs to complete reviews under NCATE standards through the 2015-16 review cycle. However, the policy did not allow for a delay of implementation of the outcomes and related consequences. Based on the findings of the on-site visit, the department prepared a recommendation to the board issuing continuing approval with stipulations. This finding initiated procedures to conduct a focused visit. Focused visits take place following a comprehensive visit to address standards that were not met during the comprehensive review. The focused visit took place on April 19th through 21st in 2015. 2 reviewers considered evidence related to Standard 2 and Standard 5. Following their review, the Commissioner's Advisory Team did their review on June 18th, 2015. In the meantime, Bethel University restarted proceedings to seek national accreditation. In conversations leading up to the next phases of this process, including pre-visit conversations, department staff made Bethel University aware of the new policy, which includes the current possible outcomes. On June 23rd, 2015, the National Accrediting Review Team, a different team than conducted the state-managed review, issued the off-site report, which highlighted significant concerns, including repeated concerns about lack of evidence and data. At the board workshop on July 23rd, 2015, the department verbally recommended that the board defer action on the item related to Bethel University's approval status. The rationale for this recommendation was that the department had received the off-site report from the National Accreditation Review Team. Based on that review, department staff believed that it was possible that the upcoming National Accreditation Review would provide additional information that the board would like to have the opportunity to consider before making a final decision. Even still, the Commissioner acknowledged that the 2 members of the focused review found that there had been some demonstration of improvement as indicated by the shift of standards and standard components being identified as weakness or met. In addition, the Commissioner indicated that existing approval with stipulations allow Bethel to continue to operate for up to 3 years while the review the required review was completed. At the board meeting on July 24, 2015, the board decided to defer the decision until after the national accreditation visit. On July 27, 2015, the department notified Bethel of this action. On October 11th through 14th, 2015, the on-site visit facilitated by the National Accrediting Agency was completed. The findings from the report indicated 2 standards were not met at both the initial and advanced levels. The 2 standards are Standard 1, candidate knowledge, skills, and professional dispositions, and Standard 2, assessment system and unit evaluation. Following the visit, Bethel submitted a rejoinder to the findings presented in the report. The rejoinder acknowledges that Bethel concurs with many of the findings in the on-site committee's report. Bethel did offer additional contextual information related to Standard 1 and stated that the institution generally concurs with the committee's conclusions regarding Standard 2. On December 28, 2015, the chair of the review team submitted a detailed systematic response to the rejoinder. In general, the chair indicated that concerns Bethel raised related to team composition and scheduling were unjustified due to prior agreement with Bethel leadership. In addition, the rejoinder reaffirms the findings of the report and provides additional clarification. On May 10, the National Accrediting Agency notified Bethel University that the Selected Improvement Commission of the Council for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation decided to grant NCATE accreditation for 2 years at the initial teacher preparation and advanced preparation levels to the School of Education at Bethel University. The department was surprised by the accreditation decision made by the National Accrediting Agency, as the existing outcome definitions indicated that accreditation would be denied, and I quote, when one or more standards are not met and the preponderance of evidence indicates problems across multiple standards by an institution seeking first-time accreditation. Based on concerns with the findings of the report and the accreditation decision, the conclusion was reached that the department could not support the accreditation decision because 2 standards were not met and 3 additional standards had identified areas for improvement. On June 23, 2016, members of the Division of Teachers and Leaders within the department developed a written statement delineating the recommendation of denial of approval. The department does not affirm the conclusion reached by the CAPE Accreditation Council. Based on the educator preparation policy, the department recommends that the board deny approval of the educator preparation provider and programs at Bethel University. Statements supporting the denial. 1, reviews of EPPs and their programs are reflective, not prospective. 2, reviews are grounded in evidence-based decision-making, actual versus intentional. NCATE Standards 1 and 2 are foundational components of preparing educators. And the rejoinder provided by the EPP does not present sufficient justification for changing the outcome of a standard being deemed not met. On July 5, 2016, the decision was presented to the department's executive leadership team. That team affirmed the recommendation of denial of approval. On July 7, 2016, members of Bethel University's leadership were notified of the recommendation that the department would make to the board. Ultimately, this decision is based on a pattern of evidence. Bethel University has repeatedly referenced restructuring as both a challenge and an opportunity for the EPP. Since the beginning of this review process, there have been at least 3 changes in EPP leadership. Further, there are significant challenges related to 2 foundational standards that focus on candidates having the knowledge and skills needed to be effective educators and collecting and tracking the data related to the assessment of candidate preparedness. Without this foundation, the department cannot recommend continued approval of the EPP. The department took a very deliberate approach to reviewing the evidence to arrive at this conclusion. A denial of approval will mean that Bethel University has 12 months to continue to recommend completers for a Tennessee educator license. For any currently enrolled candidate who is able to complete all requirements within that timeline, Bethel may make recommendation for licensure. For other candidates, we recommend that Bethel work with those individuals to support transition to another program within the university or to another approved EPP. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Amy. Mr. Butler, President of Bethel, pleased to have you with us.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. I'm gonna try to raise this just a little bit. I can't.
Somebody know how to do
All right, I'll try to make it. Give my these eyes get a little bit. Thank you very much, Chairman Ralston, Vice Chair Mrs. Perry, Commissioner of the State Board of Education, Commissioner of Education, Dr. McLean, Executive Director of the State Board of Education, Dr. Stephen Cooper. On behalf of Bellevue University, I thank you for the opportunity to address you. I have with me from Bethel 5 people I work with every day whose expertise I value. I'd like to introduce them. I have Dr. Phyllis Campbell, who is our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Lisa Norris, who is our Director of Institutional Effectiveness, Dr. Robin Sayers, who is our Co-Director of Education, Dr. Michael Poore, who is a Co-Director of Education, and by the way, those 2 co-directors of education have 49 years of experience between them. I'll let you figure out who has the most. And Dr. David Huss, who in the corner is our Vice President of Finance, who is also the former Director of the Obion County School System and the Clarksburg Special School District. And equally important, he was the former Director of the LEA Support Systems in the Department of Education at one time. There's no one in this room that respects your job on this commission or your job, Dr. McLean, as any more than myself. I do serve on a commission for Governor Haslam, and I've sat in the commissioner's chair under Governor Don Sanders. They're tough jobs, and I hold you in the highest regard for doing that. However, I must defend my alma mater, and I must defend the university I'm so honored to serve as president. I hope you respect me for that as much as I respect you, because I promise you I have a deep respect for each of you. I hope, and now you've gotten my email and a hard copy that I mailed each of you a packet out Atlanta about this current situation when I'm here today. I hope you've read it. If not, Dr. Wooten did a job of explaining that also, and I'm not going to go in detail on each point. There are some things in the attachments that I do want to cover. 13 days ago, on July 8th at 2:30, I had a phone call with Commissioner McLean, Dr. Amy Wooten, and Dr. Martin Nash. I had been warned about the nature of the call about 10 minutes before I got the call, and before the phone conference occurred. The purpose of the call shocked me. I'll be honest, I did not see this recommendation coming. That recommendation, as you now know, was to ask you, the commissioners of the State Board of Education, to deny our approval of licensure programs in our education department. In fact, for 12 days now, we have looked to see something we missed. Since last October's intake visit until the July 8, 2016 phone call, I'm not aware of any State Department of Education employee visiting our campus or any mail or email correspondence that I have received on the day of tomorrow's proposed action. Here's some of the facts I can say definitely, which are going to agree with Dr. Wooten's side. In 2013, in November, the Department of Education's review team, which I still call the Tennessee Board of Examiners, for lack of a better term, had an on-site visit and determined that Bethel met all but 2 of the intake standards. As a result, on July 25, 2014, the department recommended to you, and you approved, continuing approval with stipulations. In April 2015, as was noted, the State Education's Board of Examiners conducted a focus visit with Bethel to assess the areas of deficiencies of the 2 standards. And as a result, the Board of Examiners issued a report that concluded there were some areas of persistent weaknesses that Bethel University now met both the previously unmet intake standards. Also, based on your 2015 agenda, the State Department of Education recommended to you, this board, that Bethel be granted EPP status without stipulations. Then, in the July 25th session, the board voted, and I think the commissioner agreed, to delay to let the intake or the CAPE process work out, or ODI process play out that fall. I want to emphasize that it was discussed at the workshop last July that Bethel was, quote, under a 3-year window from 2014 to 2017 to actually create needed improvements to its approval with stipulations, unquote. It was explained at this July 2015 workshop that Bethel had, and I quote, opportunities to improve based on when they started under the prior policy with a 3-year window. So our opportunities now are to approve, deny, or approve with stipulations. At this point, Bethel is approved with stipulations, unquote. That was the workshop. In October 2015, Bethel had its intake on-site visit. The visiting committee at its exit conference said Bethel did not meet standards 1 and 2, as Dr. Wood said, of the 6 standards. In December of 2015, they did respond, and we sent our rejoinder back then. That's what's noted. Then on May the 10th, 2016, Bethel received its official notification from NCASE President, Dr. Christopher Cook. And I'm going to quote from his opening paragraph. Let me begin by thanking you for your commitment to high-quality education preparation as exemplified by your preparation in the national accreditation process. I'm writing to inform you that at its April 30, 2016 to May 3, 2016 meeting in Maryland, the Select Improvement Commission of the Council of Accreditation of Educator Preparation, CAPE, decided to grant in-CAPE accreditation for 2 years at the initial teacher preparation and the advanced preparation levels to the School of Education at Bethel University. The Commission's decision to grant in-CAPE accreditation to Bethel University requires the institution to host a visit addressing all standards no later than the fall of 2017. Following the visit, the actions that may be rendered by the Commission include continuing in-CAPE accreditation or revocation of in-CAPE accreditation. Unquote. The preceding points that I've just addressed were what we were working under, what we were going by, and then as we try to improve our schools since the April 2015 state-focused visit. Again, we were informed all standards of the State Department of Education in 2015 were met, and we were given full accreditation by NCAPE for 2 years on May the 10th, 2016. I think it's easy to see why we were shocked that the 3-year window from 2014 to 2017 would change, especially considering the improvements we are making. So, would you have been shocked the phone call we received on Friday, July the 8th? I think so. You see why I said we did not see this recommendation coming? I think you would see that also. On one hand, we were told by Commissioner McQueen, but I want to say this. She's been very upfront and very nice talking on the phone. I do owe you that. I respect it. But in our July 14, 2016 letter, we were told we were not going to get continued approval of our licensure program due to the fact the State Department of Education is not affirming the decision rendered or reached by the CAPE Accreditation Council. But in that same letter, they refer to the 2 stipulations or standards that we did not meet within CAPE. It is referred to in that letter, and that's the reason that the recommendation is coming by the state. They do not affirm the in-CAPE or CAPE decisions, but they're using those 2 standards against us as a reason for today's recommendation. That letter, July 14, 6 days after the July 8th phone call, brought me even more concerns. Well, let's briefly move ahead. Since the in-CAPE visit, we have been working hard to improve our School of Education to make sure we're producing top quality teachers. That's our goal throughout the state. The July 14, 2016 letter to us talks in details about standards 1 and 2. And we've been working on them since the in-CAPE visit? Of course we have. We have and we are addressing data, assessments, measuring student growth through various recommended methods. We have addressed our syllabi, our individual faculty and staff meet individually and weekly with our 2 co-directors. We have a new quality improvement committee. We're using better reports, sharing data once a month between our entire faculty and are documenting, and documenting. For example, we did an alumni and employer survey this spring. One recommendation was to have all student teachers from that survey pass the practice test before they do practice teaching. We have implemented that, and that begins in January 2017. The state approved our Leadership Excellence Program, so we're using that program as a model for other programs. Our improvements are much more. We are using state standards. I've been asked by several in the last 12, now 13 days, are your teachers, are your candidates not qualified? Is your quality poor? Well, let's see if that's the case. Can we use the Tennessee Higher Education Report Card as a standard? That's independent data, that's not mine. 2011, we had 19 completers, 100% passed the practice. 2012, we had 41 completers, 100% passed the practice. 2013, we had 34 completers, 100% passed the practice. 2014, we had 33 completers, 93% passed the practice. 2015, we had 35 completers, 98% passed the practice. In Carroll County, Bethel University's home county, we have 2 school systems that achieved exemplary status last year. There were only 12 statewide. Do they hire our graduates? You bet they do. Do they take our student teachers? You bet they do. If we're producing poor candidates, would we not theoretically be hurting those 2 systems that employ a lot of our teachers? Both directors will tell you different. In fact, I've got letters from them. They said I could pass that if you need. Alan Eubanks, Jonathan Key, both principals at Plano Special School District, always ask for our student teachers. I wonder why. I can tell you why. They're good. Does Bethel do everything right? No, we do not. Do we make mistakes? Yes, we do, and we'll make more. Should this program be shut down tomorrow? In your heart, I think you know it should not be. Should we be allowed to keep producing quality teachers and even improving our quality? It only makes sense to do that. Late Senator Howard Baker once told me and gave me some advice. He said, Walter, this worked for me, and maybe it'll work for you. I got this in 1978. I quote, or paraphrase, believe me, you're not going to be right all the time on the issues. You're not going to be wrong all the time on the issues. Neither will the public. Walter, there's always common ground that can be reached to improve our society. Paraphrase. I would suggest today, in closing, there is common ground. Bethel University is not asking for full approval. But Bethel University does not believe we should be denied approval and put on what I call almost a death sentence. So what is the real lasting common ground? Where the State Board of Education will still hold us accountable as we move forward, and where we're able to continue to serve our students, our schools, and the citizens of Tennessee. It appears there are three alternatives besides all or none. So how about this? You grant us probationary approval with major stipulations. That's the next to the worst. That is a viable option you have at your power. Number 2, you grant it through 2017 as the time frame the Department of Education of Tennessee has set, and the time frame we are now under with NK, their letter of May the 10th. Grant it through 2017. Number 3, if we're not a model for you in improvements and actions during this time frame, then give us the denial for next year. You got that on record now. You got it. So So let's do that. Let's put the burden on us. Number 4, to the State Department of Education, please come visit us. Please come visit our faculty, our staff, our students. Look at our books, look at our records, and the schools we serve. Number 5, to the State Department of Education, please come visit us. Our faculty, our staff, our students, our books, and tell us what we are doing right, and tell us how to correct any wrongs we might have. See our changes. Make sure our playbook now matches yours. The common ground will afford us a chance for due process and a time frame to correct. As Howard Baker would have said, that's some common ground that will help our society. And that's what we should be trying to do. We do not deserve today or tomorrow denial of approval, nor should want to. That is a path that Bethel will not overcome for 25 years, and you know that. Bethel may not have had the best data, but we have and we are producing very good teachers. Our independent data shows that. August the 1st, 2016, Bethel will begin its 175th year of existence. We would love to celebrate with you our success in all standards. I promise we are on our way now to that goal. Help us. Give us the chance to make you proud of us in 2017. Don't take that chance away. I thank you so much for the opportunity to present our side. I'd be willing to take any questions. If not, my cell phone is 731-697-1642. I'll be in town tonight and in the morning. If you want to give me a call or if you want to meet me. Thank you very much. I don't know if
Okay,
it's appropriate.
Walter, thank you. Any questions for Walter or for Amy? Or we remind you that we're not in the decision-making role here. We're seeking information, understanding of the issue. Decisions to be made tomorrow.
Just ask Amy one clarifying question. This Praxis pass rate issue, they're required to pass it? for
The
graduation?
PLT. You must pass it, feeling the claim.
I'm just trying to understand it.
It should have to be passed before you're licensed, unless you're a job embedded candidate. So that's the distinction that I
And
would
that's why
make.
some are like 97, 98%.
That would be why that would be the case. And I don't have it with me in front of me today, but I've presented it to you before, that the pass rate for the state is at something like 97 to 98%.
Okay, I was just trying to make sure I understood that issue. Thank you.
And that's of all times taken, right? And so some of those people are in there twice because they eventually have to pass it in order to be licensed.
Okay, other questions? Other questions? Okay, Amy, Walter, thank you, appreciate the review. Okay, we're now well past our timeline, but are there other items on the agenda for tomorrow that we need to talk about?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I know we're all tired, and I'm also sorry to put this off to the last reading. But I want everyone to look at 3H. Standards for school administered early childhood program and school age before and after school programs. We have a final reading tomorrow, and I was not aware exactly of what this consists of.
Let me catch up with you here.
Okay.
3H.
Well, while you're flipping, I was just reminding you, this is one that the department's asked us to defer till October for some additional feedback.
Right.
Okay.
We're
Well,
going to
may I
pull
go ahead and, is that okay? Okay. I received a letter from Jane Barker, who is the director of the child care program in Hamilton County. And I will quote, "The board, in my opinion, is singling out child care employees to require them to be fingerprinted every 5 years, and the other employees at the school, education assistants, cafeteria monitors, secretaries, cafeteria employees, nurses, custodial bus drivers, etc., are not included in this new standard. In addition, it costs around $38 to be printed, and employees have already been required to have a physical every 3 years. The employees making the least salaries in the system are going to have more requirements than the much higher paid system personnel, such as teachers, principals, etc. That struck home to me because I work with 2 preschool teachers, and I do understand what they have to go through. I guess my question that I wish we would all have to think about is this federal guidelines mandatory for us, or is it up to us as a state board to be able to deny this because the feds are doing it? There's also an issue of hiring. At this point, they can hire 18-year-olds, and they're wanting to switch that to 21 years old. And these positions are very hard to fill as it is.
Okay, is somebody prepared to answer? Like I said, we're going to remove this item from the agenda tomorrow, but we ought to be able to answer.
I'm hesitant to speak with conviction. I know we have some folks.
I've made a note, but this is being deferred, so I feel like we can give you some information between now and our next meeting. But I'll make a note of getting information around those 2 questions. So you're wanting specifically around why the 21 as opposed to the 18. The
Right.
second question around could we do something different around fingerprinting than what the federal government requires?
Right.
You want answers to those 2 questions?
Yes.
Okay.
On that same item, I had a letter about from the Montessori Alliance, and would you just let me know anything we need to know about that?
Okay, Wendy?
Just as a heads up, on the licensure actions, I'm going to be asking a full D, definitely for some questions for Philip, but probably for motion as well.
On D, dog.
Or D is in dog, yes.
Okay. Other items? Mike?
All right, so in the spring, I mentioned that I had a lot of trouble with the emergency measures that school districts have to place teachers that are not endorsed in a subject into that classroom for a year and up to another year with permission. I think I understand fully why a district really would need, or that would help them operate. But if we have to make a choice between the best how a district operates and what's in the best interest of those kids that are taking that class, I think we need to side with the kids. So what I'm asking is for in our October meeting for a resolution for discussion and possible action that we rescind that rule. It can have a lead-in period for districts to prepare themselves for it to happen. But it happens far more than, it's a commonly used tool. And it's pretty tough on those kids taking physics class from the lit teacher. Especially when we've decided it's important for them to know physics, or whatever the deal. So that's a request. I don't know the mechanism. I talked to Sarah. Sarah said bring it up during this period, and I am. I don't know the deal, but we should put something on the agenda.
Okay. We'll plan for that on the October agenda and discuss and take action forward. Okay, other items for the agenda tomorrow or anything else?
Just with concern back to the student discussion that we had earlier, you talked about perhaps having a town meeting in April, but that does not work for out of town. So I just would want to temper expectations that we'll be able to be out of town.
Okay, that's appropriate. Ms. Cloak. Yeah.
Are we in here in the morning?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm going to go next.
They can feel free to speak.
Anything else?
Think on Maurice.
Okay, I assume that we've got time to go back to the, so we're gonna be back here at 5:30, or do we not?
Oh, I thought it was 5
It
o'clock.
might be an exercise in frustration.
I
But I'm
thought
open to
went down
suggestions.
5 o'clock.
Yeah.
So, the plan is to stay,
Maybe take a few laps through the library.
okay?
Philip is pulling the van around.
Oh, he is? Okay. Well, if nothing else, if you want an air conditioned ride back and forth, it's totally at your preference whether you want to try to go back to the hotel or not.
How far is it? For those of us
It
who are
took
late.
us about 10, 15 minutes, I think, to
Yep,
get here
but
without traffic.
I understand it's quitting time.
I'm just getting parked myself. Let's go.
This is
Starbucks.
rush hour.
This is rush hour.
What's rush hour look like, John? You're okay.
Not like Nashville when.
What's the
You might be able to be all right.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, and Nathan stepped out, he really knows the locations better, but we are on campus for the dinner program that starts at 5:30. We're going to hear from some folks in the Chattanooga area about their Chattanooga 2.0 education plan. We're going to be joined by a few legislators and other special guests. But it is on the campus. I just need to find it, and we've got the maps. I just haven't found the building yet myself, so I know Nathan knows. It's walking distance, so from 5:30. And we are scheduled to be done by about 7. Yes, yes.
So it may be.
The staff here indicates you're welcome to leave your materials here. We will be meeting here in the morning.
And in that building where we're going for dinner is also walking distance from this location, right?
I can't say that. It's on the other campus.
I said to myself, I don't know why I'm reading this.